Murray, British envoy to Persia, of a darkness of May 20, 1857, that came upon Baghdad, darkness more intense than ordinary midnight, when neither stars nor moon are visible aught. After a short time the black darkness was succeeded by a red, lurid gloom, such as I never saw in any part of the world. Panic seized the whole city. A dense volume of red sand fell. This matter of sand falling seems to suggest conventional explanation enough, or that a simoon heavily charged with terrestrial sand had obscured the sun. But later we shall have an expression upon luminosity different from the luminosity of incandescence that comes upon objects falling from the sky or entering this Earth's atmosphere. In Nature 21 there is an account by Mr. Steddavian. It is all very complicated and tremendous, and our own treatment can be but impressionistic, but a few of the rudiments of advanced seismology we shall now take up, or the four principal phenomena of another world's close approach to this world. If a large substantial mass or super construction should enter this Earth's atmosphere, it is our acceptance that it would sometimes, depending upon velocity, appear luminous or look like a cloud, or like a cloud with a luminous nucleus. Now, our expression is that worlds have often come close to this Earth, and that smaller object size of a haystack or size of several dozen skyscrapers lumped have often hurtled through this Earth's atmosphere and have been mistaken for clouds because they were enveloped in clouds, or that around something coming from the intense cold of interplanetary space that is of some regions. Our own suspicion is that other regions are tropical. The moisture of this Earth's atmosphere would condense into a cloud-like appearance around it. I offer it as a datum in superbiology, which, however, is a branch of advanced science that I'll not take up, restricting to things indefinitely called cobjects. The tornado came wriggling, jumping, whirling like a great green snake, darting out a score of glistening fangs. Though it's interesting, I think that's sensational myself. It may be that vast green snakes sometimes rush past this Earth, taking a swift bite wherever they can, but as I say, that's a super-biologic phenomenon. Finlay gives dozens of instances of tornado clouds that seem to me more like solid things swathed in clouds than clouds. He notes that in the tornado at Americus, Georgia, July 18, 1881, a strange sulphurous vapor was emitted from the cloud. In many instances, objects or meteoritic stones that have come from this Earth's externality have had a sulphurous odor. Why a wind effect should be sulphurous is not clear. That a vast object from external regions should be sulphurous is in line with many data. This phenomenon is described in the Monthly Weather Review, July 1881, as strange sulphurous vapor. 1872, something like a haycock hurtling through the air. Like a meteor, it was accompanied by a fire, and a dense smoke made a noise like that of a railway train, burning and sickening all who approached close to breathe enough. The conventional explanation of tornadoes as wind effects, which we do not deny in some instances, is so strong in the United States that it is better account an object that has hurtled through this atmosphere. For account looks like has rising and falling and defying this Earth's gravitation. Nature 7:11, that according a correspondent to the Birmingham Morning News, the people living near King's Sutton, Banbury, saw about 1 o'clock day. It was sometimes high in the air and sometimes near the ground. The effect was tornado-like. Trees and walls were knocked down. It's a late day now to try to verify this story, but a list is given of persons whose property was injured. Clifton, collector of customs at Fremantle, Western Australia, sent to the Melbourne Observatory a clear day appearance of a small or black cloud, moving not very swiftly, bursting into a ball of fire, of the apparent size of the moon, or that something of an ordinary meteorite would not collect vapor around it, but that slower moving object speed of a railway train. Say may, the clouds of tornadoes have so often been described as they were solid objects that I now accept that sometimes they err, that some so-called tornadoes are objects hurtling through this Earth's atmosphere, not only generating disturbances by their suctions, but crushing with their bulk all things in their way, rising and finally disappearing, demonstrating that gravitation is not the power that the primitives think it is, if an object moving at relatively low velocity be not pulled to this earth, or being so momentarily affected, bounds away. In Finley's reports on the character of 600 tornadoes, very suggestive bits of description occur. Cloud bounded along the earth like a ball, or that it was no meteorological phenomenon, but something very much like a huge solid ball, or that was bounding along, crushing and carrying with it everything within its field. Cloud bounded along, coming to the earth every 800 or 1,000 yards. Here's an interesting bit that I got somewhere else. From time to time they drop to the bottom of the ocean. The ship does not. Or, like our acceptance upon dripping from aerial ice fields, we think of only a part of a nearby world succumbing, except in being caught in suspension, to this Earth's gravitation and surface materials falling from that part explain or express or accept. And what does it matter? Our attitude is, here are the data. See for yourself. What does it matter what my notions may be? Here are the data. But think for yourself, or think for myself, all mixed up we must be. A long time must go by before we can know Florida from Long Island. So we've had data of fishes that have fallen from our now established and respectabilized Sargasso super sea witch we've almost forgotten. It's now so respectable, but we shall have data of fishes that have fallen during earthquakes. These we accept were dragged down from ponds or other worlds that have been quaked, when only a few miles away by this earth, some other world also quaking this earth. In a way, or in its principle, our subject is orthodox enough, only grant proximity of other worlds, which, however, will not be a matter of granting, but will be a matter of datum one conventionally conceives of their surfaces quaked, even of a whole lake full of fishes being quaked and dragged down from one of them. The lake full of fishes may cause a little pain to some minds, but the fall of sand and stones is pleasantly enough thought of. More scientific persons or more faithful hypnotics than we have taken up this subject unpainfully relatively to the moon. We are told that this thing then disappeared all at once. These are the smaller objects, which may be derailed railway trains or big green snakes. For all I know but our expression upon approach to this earth by vast dark bodies that likely be made luminous, would envelop in clouds, perhaps, or would have their own clouds, but they'd quake and that affect this earth with quakes, and that then would occur a fall of matter from such a world, or rise of matter from this earth to a nearby world, or both fall and rise, or exchange of matter per process known to advanced seismology as celestial metathesis, except that if matter from some other world, and it would be like someone to get it into his head that we absolutely deny gravitation, just because we cannot accept orthodox dogma, except that if matter from another world filling the sky of this earth, generally as to a hemisphere, or locally should be attracted to this earth, it would seem thinkable that the whole thing should drop here, and not merely its surface, materials, objects upon a ship's bottom, or, theoretically, when at its closest to this earth, the moon quakes the face of this earth, and is itself quaked, but does not itself fall to this earth. For instance, Perry has gone over 15,000 records of earthquakes, and he has correlated many with proximities of the moon, or has attributed many to the pull of the moon when nearest this earth. Also, there is a paper upon this subject in the Proc. Roy. Sock of Cornwall, 1845. To the primitives, there is not a reason in the world why a convulsion of this earth's surface should be accompanied by unusual sights in the sky, by darkness, or by the fall of substances or objects from the sky. As to phenomena like these, or storms preceding earthquakes, the irreconcilability is still greater. It was before 1860 that Perry made his great compilation. We take most of our data from lists compiled long ago. Only the safe and unpainful have been published in recent years, at least in ambitious, voluminous form. The restraining hand of the systems, we call it, whether it has any real existence or notice tight upon the sciences of today. As to showers of matter that may have come from the moon at such time, someone can go over old records and find what one pleases. That is what we now shall do. Our expressions are for acceptance only. Our data, we take them from 4 classes of phenomena that have preceded or accompanied earthquakes, unusual clouds, darkness profound, luminous appearances in the sky, and falls of substances and objects, whether commonly called meteoritic or not. Not one of these occurrences fits in with principles of primitive or primary seismology, and every one of them is a datum of a quake body passing close to this earth or suspended over it. There is only continuity that is in quasi-existence. The uncanniest aspect of our quasi-existence that I know of is that everything that seems to have one identity has also as high a seeming of everything else. In this oneness of allness, or continuity, the protecting hand strangles, the parental stifles. Love is inseparable from phenomena of hate. After the death of Richard Proctor, whose occasional illiberalities I'd not like to emphasize too much, all succeeding volumes of knowledge have yielded scarcely an unconventionality. Nature, at least in its correspondence columns, still evades this protective strangulation, and the Monthly Weather Review is still a rich field of unfaithful observation. But in looking over other long-established periodicals, I have noted their glimmers of quasi-individuality fade gradually after about 1860, and the surrender of their attempted identities to a higher attempted organization. We could tell stories of great labor and fruitless quests that would, though perhaps imperceptibly, stir the sympathy of a Mr. Simons. Note a great number of times that the American Journal of Science and the report of the British Association are quoted. Note that after, say, 1885, they're scarcely mentioned in these inspired but illicit pages as by hypnosis and inertia, we keep on saying, about 1880. Throttle and disregard. But the coercion could not be positive, and many of the excommunicated continued to creep in, or even to this day, some of the strangled are faintly breathing. Some of our data have been hard to find, some of them expressing intermediateness, wide endeavor to localize the universal, or to localize self, soul, identity, entity or positiveness, or realness shelled out until as far as 1880. Traces findable up to 1890, and then expressing the universal process, except they're here, and there in the work may have been successful approximations to positiveness by individuals who only then became individuals and attained to selves or souls of their own submitted, became parts of a higher organization's attempt to individualize or systematize into a complete thing, or to localize the universal or the attributes of the universal. But in this matter of concurrence of earthquakes with aerial phenomena, which are as unassociable with earthquakes, if internally caused, as falls of sand on convulsed small boys full of sore apples, the abundance of so-called evidence is so great that we can only sketchily go over the data, beginning with Robert Mollett's catalogue Rep. 9, 1731, thick mists in the air through which a dim light was seen several weeks before the shock. Globes of light had been seen in the air. Swabia made 22 70-30 train of earth, carpenters, France, Octenbrit, Assoc, 1852, omitting some extraordinary instances because they occurred before the 18th century earthquake, preceded by a violent tempest, England, Jan. 874, preceded by a brilliant meteor, Switzerland, Nov. 4, 1704, luminous cloud moving at high velocity, disappearing behind the horizon. Florence, Dec. 1737, a black cloud, London. March 1950, violent storm and a strange star of octagonal shape, Slavange, Norway, April 15, 1745, fires a two-ball from a streak in the sky. Algermanland, 1752, numerous meteorites, Lisbon, Oct. 1755, terror and obel tempest, over and over falls of hail and brilliant meteors, instance after instance an immense globe, Switzerland, Nov. 2. 1761, Blanc, sulphurous cloud. Germany, April. 1760 said, extraordinary mass of vapor, Boulogne, April. 1780, heavens obscured by a dark mist, Granada, Og. 1804, strange howling noises in the air and large spots obscuring the sun, Palermo, Italy, April 16th, 1870, and luminous meteor moving in the same direction as the shock. Naples, Nov. 22, 1812, and fireball appearing in the sky, apparent size of the moon, Thuringerwald, Nov. I'm a solace and selfless correlate to the new dominant. Myself, I see what I have to see. The only inducement I can hold out in my attempt to rake up disciples is that someday the new will be fashionable. The new correlates will sneer at the old correlates. The streak that was seen in the sky are only a streak that was visible of another world and objects, or meteorites that were shaken down from it. After all, there is some inducement to the tand. I'm not altogether sure it's desirable to end up as a fixed star. As a correlate to the new dominant, I am very much impressed with some of these data. Luminous object that moved in the same direction as an earthquake. It seems very acceptable that a quake followed this thing as it passed near this Earth's surface. The call they feel for one another, the quake at Carpentras, France, and that above Carpentras was a smaller world, more violently quaked, so that Earth was shaken down from it. But I like best the super wolves that were seen to cross the sun during the earthquake at Palermo. They howled. Or the loves of the worlds. They try to move closer and howl when they get there. The howls of the planets. I have discovered a new unintelligibility. In the Edinburgh New Philosophical Journal, I have to go away back to 1841 days of less efficient strangulation, Sir David Milne lists phenomena of quakes in Great Britain as to the extraordinary spectacle of a thing world, superconstruction, that was seen in the sky. In 1816, I have not yet been able to find out more. 29th, 1831. And unless you be polarized by the new dominant, which is calling for a recognition of multiplicities of external things, as a dominant dawning new over Europe in 1492, called for recognition of terrestrial externality. To Europeanists, you have this contact with the new. You have no affinity for these data beams that drop from magnetoreconcilables that glide from the mind of a Thomson or my own acceptance, that we do not really think at all, that we correlate around super magnets that I call dominance, a spiritual dominant in one age, and responsively to it upspring monasteries, and the stake and the cross are its symbols, a materialist dominant, and up spring laboratories and microscopes and tellus and crucibles are its icons that were nothing but iron filings relatively to a succession of magnets that displace preceding magnets, with no soul of your own and with no soul of my own, except that someday some of us may no longer be intermediatisms, but may hold out against the cosmos that once upon a time the thousands of fishes were cast from one pail of water, or have psychovalency for these data, if we're obedient slaves to the new dominant and repulsion to them, if we're mere correlates to the old dominant. I think I should have brought it in before, but whether out of place here, because not accompanied by earthquake or not, will have it. I offer it as an instance of an eclipse by a vast dark body that has been seen and reported by an astronomer. I pick out a few that indicate to me that other worlds were near this Earth's surface, a violent storm, before a shock, before a 703 ball of fire, preceding 1750 large ball of fire seen upon day following a quake. 1755, uncommon phenomenon in the air, a large luminous body bent like a crescent which stretched itself over the heavens. 1816, vast ball of fire. 1750, black rains and black snows. 755, numerous instances of upward projection or upward attraction. During quake preceded by a cloud, very black and lowering. 79.5 fall black powder, preceding a quake by 6 hours, 1837. Some of these instances seem to me to be very striking. A smaller world is greatly racked by the attraction of this earth-black substance, is torn down from Itronaut until 6 hours later. After an approach still closer, does this earth suffer perturbation? I'm beginning to modify that at a distance from this earth, gravitation has more effect than we have supposed, though less effect than the dogmatists suppose and prove. I'm coming out stronger for the acceptance of a neutral zone, that this earth, like other magnets, has a neutral zone in which is the super, Sargas OC, and in which other worlds may be buoyed up, though projecting parts may be subject to Earth's attraction, but my preference here are the data. I now want to have one of the most interesting of the new correlates. I think that here our acceptance is relatively sound, that this occurrence was tremendously of more importance than such occurrence as, say, transits of Venus, upon which hundreds of papers have been written that not another mention have I found, though I have not looked socially, as I shall look for more data that all but undetailed record of this occurrence was suppressed. Altogether, we have considerable agreement here between data of vast masses that do not fall to this earth, but from which substances fall, and data of fields of ice from which ice may not fall, but from which water may drip. The astronomer is M. Lias. The phenomenon was seen by him at Pernambuco, April 11, 1860. Comptus rendus 50 hours 90 sedentary. It was about noonski cloudless. Suddenly the light of the sun was diminished. The darkness increased, and to illustrate its intensity, we are told that the planet Venus shone brilliant. But Venus was low visibility at this time. The observation that burns incense to the new dominant is that around the sun appeared a corona. There are many other instances that indicate proximity of other worlds during earthquakes. I note a fuquake, an object in the sky called Ul large luminous meter. Jaw. Roy. Inst. 5:32, luminous body in the sky, earthquake, and fall of sand, Italy, Feb. 12 and 13, 1870, La Science Portas, 59, many reports upon luminous object in the sky and earthquake, Connecticut. Feb 27, 1883, Monthly Weather Review. February 1883, luminous object or meter in the sky, fall of stones from the sky, and earthquake, Italy, Jan. 20, 1891, Astronomy, 1891, 154. Earthquake and prodigious number of luminous bodies or globes in the air. Boulogne, France, June 7, 1779, Sestia, 1469. Earthquake at Manala, 1863. And curious luminous appearance in the sky. Ponton, earthquakes, P, 124. The most notable appearance of fishes during an earthquake is that of Riobamba. Humboldt sketched one of them, and it's an uncanny looking thing. Thousands of them appeared upon the ground during this tremendous earthquake. Humboldt says that they were cast up from subterranean sources. I think not myself, and have data for thinking not, but there'd be such a row arguing back for to consider a clearer instance of the fall of living fishes from the sky during an earthquake. I can't quite accept myself whether a large lake and all the fishes in it was torn down from some other world, or a lake in the super Sargasso Sea, distracted between two pulling worlds, was dragged down to this earth. Here are the data. La Science Portas, 6991, Feb 16th, 1861. An earthquake at Singapore. Then came an extraordinary downpour of rain, or as much water as any good sized lake would consist of. For 3 days this rain, or this fall of water, came down in torrents. In pools on the ground, formed by this deluge, great numbers of fishes were found. The writer says that he had himself seen nothing but water fall from the sky. Whether I'm emphasizing what a deluge it was or not, he says that so terrific had been the downpour that he had not been able to see 3 steps away from him. The native said that the fishes had fallen from the sky. A psychotropism here is mechanically to take pen in hand and mechanically write that fishes found on the ground after a heavy rainfall came from overflowing streams. 3 days later the pools dried up and many dead fishes were found, but in the first place, though, That's an expression for which we have an instinctive dislike if fishes had active, and ununju. And then follows material for another of our little studies in the phenomena of disregard. The writer of the account says that some of the fishes had been found in his courtyard, which was surrounded by high walls, paying no attention to this. A correspondent, Le Science Portas, 6317 explains that in the heavy rain a body of water had probably overflowed, carrying fishes with it. We are told by the first writer that these fishes of Singapore were of a species that was very abundant near Singapore. So I think myself that a whole lakeful of them had been shaken down from the Super Sargasso Sea under the circumstances we have thought of. However, if appearance of strange fishes after an earthquake be more pleasing in the sight, or to the nostrils of the new dominant, we faithfully and piously supply that instancy an account of the occurrence at Singapore was read by M. de Castelnau before the French Academy. This time a longer duration is indicated than in other instances. In the Canadian Institute Proceedings 27198, there is an account by the Deputy Commissioner at Dhurmsala of the extraordinary Dhurmsala meteorite data coated with ice. Some of them were not very high. They appeared and went out and reappeared. De Castelnau recalled that upon a former occasion he had submitted to the Academy the circumstance that fishes of a new species had appeared at the Cape of Good Hope after an earthquake. It seems proper, and it will give lustre to the new orthodoxy now to have an instance in which not merely quake and fall of rocks or meteorites, or quake and either luminiferous appearances in the sky have occurred, but in which are combined all the phenomena, one or more of which, when accompanying earthquake, indicate in our acceptance the proximity of another world. But the combination of events related by him is still more extraordinary. That within a few months of the fall of this meteorite, there had been a fall of live fishes at Benares, a shower of red substance at Farrukhabad, a dark spot observed on the disk of the sun, earthquake, an unnatural darkness of some duration, and a luminous appearance in the sky that looked like an aurora borealis. But there's more to this climax. We introduced to a new order of phenomena, visitors. The Deputy Commissioner writes that, in the evening, after the fall of the Dhurmsala meteorite, or mass of stone covered with ice, he saw lights. The ancient Chinese tradition, the marks like hoof marks in the ground. I have read many accounts of the Dhurmsala meteorite July 28, 1860, but never in any other of them a mention of this new coral something as out of place in the 19th century, as would have been an aeroplane invention, of which would not, in our acceptance, have been permitted in the 19th century, though adumbrations to it were permitted. It seems to us that marks described as little cones surrounded by basins of equal diameter would be like hoof prints if hoofs printed complete circles. Trans 500 after the quake of July 15, 1757, upon the sands of Penzance, Cornwall, in an area of more than 100 square yards, were found marks like hoof prints, except that they were not crescentic. We feel a similarity, but note an arbitrary disregard of our own this time. This writer says that the lights moved like they are fire balloons, but I am sure that they were neither fire balloons, lanterns, nor bonfires, or any other thing of that sort, but bona fide lights in the heavens. It's a subject for which we shall have to have a separate expression spaces upon territory to which something else has a legal right, perhaps. Someone lost a rock, and he and his friends came down looking for it. In the evening, or secret agents or emissaries who had an appointment with certain esoteric ones near domicile things or beings coming down to explore, and unable to stay down long in a way, another strange occurrence during an earthquake is suggested. We have thought with a low degree of acceptance of another world that may be in secret communication with certain esoteric ones of this one's earth inhabitants, and of messages in symbols like hoof marks that are sent to some receptor or a special hill upon this earth, and of messages that at times miscarry. This other world comes close to this world. There are quakes, but advantage of proximity is taken to send a message, the message. Designed for a receptor in India, perhaps, or in Central Europe, miscarries all the way to England. Marks, like the marks of the Chinese tradition, are found upon a beach in Cornwall after an earthquake filled. Other disregards that there were black specks on the tops of cones, as if something, perhaps gaseous, had issued from them, that from one of these formations came a gush of water as thick as a man's wrist. Though to super chemistry we have introduced the principle of celestial metathesis, we have no good data of exchange of substances during proximities. The data are all of falls and not of upward translations. Of course, the open of springs is common in earthquakes, but we suspect, myself, that the negative absolute is compelling us to put in this datum and its disorders. There's another matter in which the negative absolute seems to work against us. Of course, upward impulses are common during earthquakes, but I haven't a datum upon a tree or a fish or a brick or a man that ever did go up and stay up, and that never did come down again. The city of Lisbon was in profound darkness. The quay and all the people on it disappeared. Subjectively, the breaking down is aided by our own sense of false and narrow limitations. And they went down not a single corpse, not a shred of clothing, not a plank of the quay, nor so much as a splinter of it ever floated to the surface. 18, the new dominant. I mean, primarily, all that opposes exclusionism, that development or progress or evolution is attempt to positivize, and is a mechanism by which a positive existence is recruited, that what we call existence is a womb of infinitude and is itself only incubatory, that eventually all attempts are broken down by the falsely excluded. So the classic and academic artist wrought positivist paintings and expressed the only ideal that I am conscious of, though we so often hear of ideals instead of different manifestations, artistically, scientifically, theologically, politically, of the one ideal. Our classic of the horse and barn occurred in what was called a whirlwind. It is said that in an earthquake in Calabria, paving stones shot up far in the air. The writer doesn't specifically say that they came down again, but something seems to tell me they did. The corpses of Riobamba. Humboldt reported that in the quake of Riobamba, bodies were torn upward from graves, that the vertical motion was so strong that bodies were tossed several hundred feet in the air. I explain that if in the center of greatest violence of an earthquake anything ever has gone up and has kept on going up, the thoughts of the nearest observers vary likely upon other subjects. The Quay of Lisbon. We are told that it went down, a vast throng of persons to the quay for refuge. They sought to satisfy in its artistic aspect a craving for unity or completeness, sometimes called harmony, called beauty in some aspects. By disregard, they sought completeness. But the light effects that they disregarded and their narrow confinement to standardized subjects brought on a revolt of the Impressionists. So there is revolt against the science of today because the formulated utterances that were regarded as final truths as in a past generation are now seen to be insufficiencies. So the Puritans tried to systematize, and they disregarded physical needs or vices or relaxations. They were invaded and overthrown when their narrowness became obvious and intolerable. All things strive for positiveness for themselves or for quasi-systems of which they are parts. Formality and the mathematic, the regular and the uniform are aspects of the positive state, but the positive is the universal, so all attempted positiveness that seems to satisfy and the aspects of formality and regularity. Sooner or later disqualifies in the aspect of wideness or universalness. Every pronouncement that has opposed our own acceptances has been found to be a composition like any academic painting, something that is arbitrarily cut off from relations with environment, or framed off from interfering and disturbing data, or outlined with disregards. Of course, it may be that someday we shall systematize and dogmatize, and refuse to think of anything that we may be accused of disregarding, and believe instead of merely accepting. Then, if we could have a wider system which would acknowledge no irreconcilables, we'd be higher positivists. The final is unutterable in quasi-existence, where to think is to include but also to exclude or be not final. If we admit that for every opinion we have expressed, there must somewhere be an irreconcilable, we are intermediatists and not positivists, not even higher positivists. Our own attempt has been to take in the included, but also to take in the excluded into wider expressions. We accept, however, that for every one of our expressions there are irreconcilables, that final utterance would include all things. However, of such is the gossip of angels. In all this, I think we're quite a Moses. So long as we only accept, we are not higher positivists, but our feeling is that the new dominant, even though we have thought of it only as another enslavement, will be the nucleus for higher positivism, and that it will be the means of elevating into infinitude a new batch of fixed stars until, as a recruiting instrument, it will play out too, and will give way to some new medium for generating absoluteness. It is our acceptance that all astronomers of today have lost their souls, or rather all chance of attaining entity, but that Copernicus and Kepler and Galileo and Newton and conceivably Leverrier are now fixed stars. Someday I shall attempt to identify them. We point out the promised land, but unless we be cured of our intermediatism, will never be reported in monthly notices. Ourself, in our acceptance, dominance, in their succession, displace preceding dominance, not only because they are more nearly positive, but because the old dominance as recruiting mediums play out. Our expression is that the new dominant of wider inclusions is now manifesting throughout the world, and that the old exclusionism is everywhere breaking down. The painters are metaphysicians and psychologists. The breaking down of exclusionism in China and Japan and in the United States has astonished history. I think that in general acceptance, over-refinement indicates decadence. I think that the stronghold of inclusionism is in aeronautics. I think the stronghold of the old dominant, when it was new, was in the invention of the telescope. The science of astronomy is going downward, so that though Pickering, for instance, did speculate upon a trans-Neptunian planet, and Lowell did try to have accepted heretical ideas as to marks on Mars, attention is now minutely focused upon such technicalities as variations in shades of Jupiter's fourth satellite. In physics, exclusionism is breaking down by its own researches in radium, for instance, and in its speculations upon electrons, or it's merging away into metaphysics, and by the desertion that has been going on for many years by such men as Gurney, Crookes, Wallace, Flammarion, Lodge, to formerly disregarded phenomena no longer called spiritualism, but now psychic research. Biology is in chaos. Conventional Darwinites mixed up with mutationists and orthogenicists and followers of Weismann, who take from Darwinism one of its pseudo bases and nevertheless try to reconcile their heresies with orthodoxy. I suggest to some of our disciples that they look into the matter of messages upon pigeons, of course attributed to earthly owners, but said to be undecipherable. I do it ourselves. Only that would be selfish. I think I rather emphasize our industriousness, because a charge likely to be brought against the attitude of acceptance is that one who only accepts must be one of languid interest and a little application of energy. It doesn't seem to work out. We are very industrious. That's more of the intermediatism that will keep us out of the firmament. Positivism is absolute egoism. But look back in the time of Andre's polar expedition, or that coincidentally with the breakdown of exclusionism as the means of finding out whether there are vast aerial fields of ice and floating lakes full of frogs and fishes, or not, where carved stones and black substances and great quantities of vegetable matter and flesh, which may be dragons of flesh, come from whether there are interplanetary trade routes and vast areas devastated by Tamerlanes, whether sometimes there are visitors to this earth who might be pursued and captured and questioned. 19, I have industriously sought data for an expression upon birds, but the prospecting has not been very quasi-satisfactory. Pigeons that would have no publicity ordinarily were often reported at that time. In the Zoologist 3/1821 is recorded an instance of a bird puffin that had fallen to the ground with a fractured head. Interesting, but mere speculation, but what solid object high in the air had that bird struck against? Tremendous red rain in France. 60 and 17, 1846, great storm at the time, and red rain supposed to have been colored by matter swept up from this earth surface, and then precipitated Comptus 23:832. But in Comptus renders 24:625, the description, this red rain differs from one's impression of red, sandy or muddy water. It is said that this rain was so vividly red and so blood like that many persons in France were terrified. Two analyses are given Comptus renders 24:8812. One chemist notes a great quantity of corpuscles, whether blood-like corpuscles or noten the matter. The other chemist sets down organic matter at 35%. The other notes are upon birds that have fallen from the sky in the midst of storms, or of exhausted but living birds falling not far from a storm area. McCady quotes from the Baton Rouge correspondence to the Philadelphia Times that in the summer of 1896, into the streets of Baton Rouge, and from a clear sky fell hundreds of dead birds. It may be that an interplanetary dragon had been slain somewhere, or that this red fluid, in which were many corpuscles, came from something not altogether pleasant to contemplate, about the size of the Catskill Mountains, perhaps, but the present datum is that with this substance, larks, quail, ducks, and water hens, some of them alive, fell at Lyons and Grenoble and other places. I have notes upon other birds that have fallen from the sky, but unaccompanied by the red rain that makes the fall of birds in France peculiar, and very peculiar, if it be accepted that the red substance was extra mundane. There were wild ducks and catbirds, woodpeckers, and many birds of strange plumage, some of them resembling canaries. Usually, one does not have to look very far from any place to learn of a storm, but now we shall have an instance for which I can find no parallel fall of dead birds from a clear sky, far distant from any storm to which they could be attributed, so remote from any discoverable storm that my own notion is that in the summer of 1896, something or some beings came as near to this earth as they could upon a hunting expedition, that in the summer of 1896, an expedition of super scientists. Science passed over this earth and let down a dragnet, and what would it catch sweeping through the air, supposing it to have reached not quite to this earth? In the Monthly Weather Review, May 1917, WL. But the best that could be done in this instance was to say there had been a storm on the coast of Florida, and unless he have psychochemic repulsion for the explanation, the reader feels only momentary astonishment that dead birds from a storm in Florida should fall from an unstormy sky in Louisiana, and with his intellect greased like the plumage of a wild duck. The datum then drops off our greasy, shiny brains. And we thought we'd settled that, and we thought we'd established that, but nothing's ever settled, and nothing's ever established in a real sense, if in a real sense there is nothing in quasiness. I suppose there had been a storm somewhere, the storm in Florida, perhaps, and many birds had been swept upward into the super. Sargasso Sea. It has frigid regions, and it has tropical regions that birds of diverse species had been swept upward into an icy region where, huddling together for warmth, they had died. The writers deny spirit communication and say that the seeming data are data of only telepathy. Astonishing instances of seeming clairvoyance, only telepathy. After a while, the reader finds himself agreeing that it's only telepathy which, at first, had been intolerable to him. So maybe, in 1896, a super dragnet did not sweep through this Earth's atmosphere, gathering up all the birds within its field, the meshes then suddenly breaking, or that the birds of Baton Rouge were only from the super Sargasso Sea, upon which we shall have another expression, that they may be of some use, after all, that other modes of existence place a high value upon them as lubricants, that were hunted for them, a hunting expedition to this earth. The newspapers report a tornado. If from a clear sky, or a sky in which there were no driven clouds or other evidences of still continuing wind power. If from a storm in Florida, it could be accepted that hundreds of birds had fallen far away. In Louisiana, I conceive conventionally of heavier objects having fallen in Alabama, say, and of the fall of still heavier objects still nearer the origin in Florida. The sources of information of the Weather Bureau are widespread. It has no records of such falls. So, a dragnet that was let down from above something that I learned from the more scientific of the investigators of psychic phenomena. The reader begins their works with prejudice against telepathy and everything else of psychic phenomena. From the circumstances, we incline to accept that this hay went up in a whirlwind from this earth in the first place, reached the super Sargasso Sea, and remained there a long time before falling. We basically suggest that it would bring a high price but sell soon, because after a while there'd be thousands of them hawked around. We weekly drop a hint to the aeronauts. In the Scientific American, 3397, there is an account of some hay that fell from the sky. I suppose I should have been more emotionally occupied, but I made notes upon torn-up papers thrown high in the air from windows of office buildings. Scraps of paper did stay together for a while. An interesting point in this expression is the usual attribution to a local and coinciding whirlwind, an identification of it and then data that make that local whirlwind unacceptable. That upon July 27, 1875, small masses of damp hay had fallen at Monkstown, Ireland. In the Dublin Daily Express, Dr. J. Duayayu Moore had explained he had found a nearby whirlwind to the south of Monkstown that coincided. But according to the Scientific American, a similar fall had occurred near Wrexham, England, 2 days before. In November 1918, I made some studies upon light objects thrown into the air. Armistice Day. Then, later, had there been dislodged meter coming along, boat, bicycle, wagon, don't know what did come along something, dislodged them. So leaves of trees carried up there in whirlwind, staying there years, ages, perhaps only a few months, but then falling to this earth at an unseasonable time for dead leaves fishes carried up there, some of them dying and drying, some of them living in volumes of water that are in abundance up there, or that fall sometimes in the deluges that we call cloudbursts. The astronomers won't think kindly of us, and we haven't done anything to endear ourselves to the meteorologists, but we're weak and mawkish intermediatists several times. We've tried to get the aeronauts with use extraordinary things up there, things that curators of museums would give up all hope of ever being fixed stars, to obtain, things left over from whirlwinds of the time of the pharaohs, perhaps, or that Elijah did go up in the sky in something like a chariot, and may not be Vega after all, and that there may be a wheel or so left of whatever he went up in. Several minutes, sometimes, Cosmos 3457-43, that upon the 10th of April, 1869, at Autrichi Indra, et Loer a great number of oak leaves enormous segregation of them fell from the sky. Very calm day. So little wind that the leaves fell almost vertically. Fall lasted about 10 minutes. Flammarion. In the atmosphere. P. I emphasize that this occurred in April. Nature 1889-94. That upon April 1918-89 dried leaves of different species. Oak, elm fell from the sky. This day, too, was a calm day. The fall was tremendous. If I were a painter, I'd like that subject. But this cataract of dried leaves 2 is a study in the rhythms of the dead. In this datum, the point most agreeable to us is the very point that the writer in the Nature emphasizes. Windlessness. He says that the surface of the Loire was absolutely smooth. The river was strewn with leaves as far as he could see. Astronomy, 1894-1904. That upon the 7th of April, 1894, dried leaves fell at Clairvaux and Outre, Aube, France. The fall is described as prodigious. Half an hour, Fort or Elve, tells this story. He has to find a storm. He does find a squall, but it had occurred upon April 3rd. Flammarion's 2 incredibilities are that leaves could remain a week in the air, that they could stay together a week in the air. Think of some of your own observations upon papers thrown from an aeroplane. Our one incredibility that these leaves had been whirled up 6 months before, when they were common on the ground and had been sustained, of course, not in the air, but in a region gravitationally inert, and had been precipitated by the disturbances of April rains. I have no records of leaves that have so fallen from the sky in October or November, the season when one might expect dead leaves to be raised from one place and precipitated somewhere else. The leaves were seen to fall 15 minutes, but judging from the quantity on the ground, it is the writer's opinion that they had already been falling half an hour. And I think that the gaze of corpses that sprang from Riobamba toward the sky must have been an interesting sight. Then, upon the 11th, fall of dried leaves occurred at Pontcarré. It is in this recurrence that we found some of our opposition to the conventional explanation. The editor Flammarion explains. He says that the leaves had been caught up in a cyclone which had expended its force, that the heavier leaves had fallen first. We think that was all right for 1894, and that it was quite good enough for 1894. The factor of localization is interesting. Not a note have I upon fall of leaves from the sky, except these notes, with a conventional explanation. All hold correlate, acceptable. It would seem that similar occurrences in other regions should be as frequent as in France. But in these more exacting days, we want to know how wind power insufficient to hold some leaves in the air could sustain others 4 days. The factors in this expression are unseasonableness, not for dried leaves, but for prodigious numbers of dried leaves, direct for windlessness, month of April, and localization in France. Some other time I shall take up super geography and be guilty of charts. I think now that the Super Sargasso Sea is an oblique belt with changing ramifications over Great Britain, France, Italy, and on to India. Relatively to the United States, I am not very clear, but think especially of the southern states. The preponderance of our data indicates frigid regions aloft. Nevertheless, such phenomena as putrefaction have occurred often enough to make super-tropical regions also acceptable. We shall have one more datum upon the Super Sargasso Sea. It seems to me that by this time our requirements of support and reinforcement and agreement have been quite as rigorous for acceptance as ever for belief, at least for full acceptance. The indication is that there may be quasi-permanent undulations in the Super Sargasso Sea, or a pronounced inclination toward France inspiration, that there may be a nearby world complementary to this world, where autumn occurs at the time that is springtime here. Let some disciple have that. but there may be a dip toward France. So that leaves that are born high there are more likely to be held in suspension than high-flying leaves elsewhere. By virtue of mere acceptance, we may in some later book deny the super Sargasso Sea and find that our data relate to some other complementary world instead of the moon, and have abundant data for accepting that the moon is not more than 20 or 30 miles away. It is said that they were identified as products of a tree found only in Central Africa and the Antilles. If in terms of conventional reasoning these seeds had been high in the air, they had been in a cold region. However, the super Sargasso Sea functions very well as a nucleus around which to gather data that oppose exclusionism. That is our main motive, to oppose exclusionism, or our agreement with cosmic processes. The climax of our general expression upon the super Sargasso Sea coincidentally appears something else that may overthrow it later. Notes and queries 8/12/2000-2283 that in the province of Macerata, Italy, summer of 1897, an immense number of small, blood-colored clouds covered the sky. About an hour later, a storm broke, and myriad seeds fell to the ground. At present, we have not the delusions of absolutism that may have translated some of the positivists of the 19th century to heaven. We are intermediatists, but feel a lurking suspicion that we may someday solidify and dogmatize and illiberalize into higher positivists. Scientists in the past have taken the positivist attitudes, this or that reasonable or unreasonable, analyze them, and we find that they meant relatively to a standard such as Newtonism, Daltonism, Darwinism, or Lyellism. But it is our acceptance that these seeds had for a considerable time been in a warm region, and for a time longer than is attributable to suspension by wind power. It is said that a great number of the seeds were in the first stage of germination. 20, the new dominant. Inclusionism. In it we have a pseudo-standard. We have a datum, and we give it an interpretation in accordance with our pseudo-standard. And at present we do not ask whether something be reasonable or preposterous, because we recognize that by reasonableness and preposterousness are meant agreement and disagreement with a standard which must be a delusion, though not absolutely. Of course, it must someday be displaced by a more advanced quasi-delusion. Of course, they too are quasi, or but in a relative sense that they have an essence of what is called realness. They are derived from experience or from scenes relations, even though grotesque distortions. But they have written and spoken and thought as if they could mean real reasonableness and real unreasonableness. So our pseudo-standard is inclusionism. And if a datum be a correlate to a more widely inclusive outlook as to this earth and its externality and relations with externality, its harmony with inclusionism admits it. It seems acceptable that a table that is seen when one is awake is more nearly real than a dream table, which with 15 or 20 legs chases one. So now, the 20th century, with a change of terms and a change in underlying consciousness, our attitude toward the new dominant is the attitude of the scientists of the 19th century to the old dominant. Such was the process, and such was the requirement for admission in the days of the old dominant. Our difference is in underlying intermediatism, or consciousness, that though we're more nearly real, we in our standards are only quasi or that all things in our intermediate state are phantoms in a super, mind in a dreaming state but striving to awaken to realness. Though in some respects our own intermediatism is unsatisfactory, our underlying feeling is that in a dreaming mind awakening is accelerated if phantoms in that mind know that they're only phantoms in a dream. If they do, they are acceptable, perhaps only for a short time, or as nuclei, or scaffolding, or preliminary sketches, or as gropings and tentativenesses. We do not insist that our data and interpretation shall be shocking, grotesque, evil, ridiculous, childish, insincere, laughable, ignorant to 19th centuryites, as were their data and interpretations to the medieval Minded. We ask only whether data interpretations correlate. A point in intermediatism here is opposed to most current speculations upon development. Later, of course, when we cool off and harden and radiate into space most of our present mobility, which expresses in modesty and plasticity, we shall acknowledge no scaffoldings, gropings, or tentativenesses, but think we utter absolute facts. Final solidification of the ethereal is, to us, the goal of cosmic ambition. Positivism is Puritanism. Heat is evil. Final good is absolute frigidity. A positivist would gather all data that seem to relate to one kind of visitors and coldly disregard all other data. Usually one thinks of the spiritual as higher than the material, but in our acceptance, quasi-existence is a means by which the absolutely immaterial materializes absolutely, and being intermediate is a state in which nothing is finally either immaterial or material, all objects, substances, thoughts, occupying some grade of approximation, one way or the other. An Arctic winter is very beautiful, but I think that interest in monkeys chattering in palm trees accounts for our own intermediatism. Visitors. Our confusion here, out of which we are attempting to make quasi-order, is as great it has been throughout this book, because we have not the positivist's delusion of homogeneity. I think of as many different kinds of visitors to this earth as there are visitors to New York, to a jail, to a church. Some persons go to church to pick pockets, for instance. My own acceptance is that either a world or a vast super construction or a world, if red substances and fishes fell from Ithavard over India in the summer of 1860. 1860, Syed Abdullah, professor of Hindustani, University College, London, writes that he had sent to a friend in Dharamsala for an account of the stones that had fallen at that place. The answer, something then fell from somewhere. July 7th, 1860 at Dharamsala. However, what was it? Is so persistently alluded to as meteorite that I look back and see that I adopted this convention myself. But in the London Times, deck, divers forms and sizes, many of which bore great resemblance to ordinary cannonballs just discharged from engines of war. It's an addition to our data of spherical objects that have arrived upon this earth. Tremendous indeed, he says. But we are prepared for anything nowadays. That is satisfactory. We'd not like to creep up stealthily and then jump out of a corner with our data. This editor, at least, is prepared to read nature. Ocken. 1898, a correspondent writes that in the County Wicklow, Ireland, at about 6 o'clock in the evening, he had seen in the sky an object that looked like the moon in its three-quarter aspect. We note the shape which approximates to triangularity, and we note that in color it is said to have been golden yellow. We shall begin with data that we cannot distinguish ourselves and work our way out of mergers into extremes. In the observatory 5768, it is said that, according to a newspaper, March 6, 1912, residents of Warmley, England, were greatly excited by something that was supposed to be a splendidly illuminated aeroplane passing over the village. The machine was apparently travelling at a tremendous rate and came from the direction of Bath and went on toward Gloucester. The editor says that it was a large, triple-headed fireball. It moved slowly and in about 5 minutes disappeared behind a mountain. The editor gives his opinion that the object may have been an escaped balloon. In Nature, Arg. 1898, there is a story taken from the July number of the Canadian Weather Review by the meteorologist F.F. painted that he had seen in the Canadian sky a large pear-shaped object sailing rapidly. It was about as broad as a rainbow and about 12 degrees high. At first he supposed that the object was a balloon, its outline being sharply defined. But, as no cage was seen, it was concluded that it must be a mass of cloud. About 6 minutes this object became less definite weather, because increasing distance, or not hot, the mass became less dense, and finally it disappeared. As to cyclonic formation, no whirling motion could be seen. Nature 58-294a. That upon July 18, a correspondent had seen at Kiel an object in the sky coloured red by the sun, which had set. It remained in its original brightness about 5 minutes, and then faded rapidly, and then remained almost stationary again, finally disappearing about 8 minutes after I first saw it. In an intermediate existence, we quasi-persons have nothing to judge by, because everything is its own opposite. If $100 a week be a standard of luxurious living to some persons, it is poverty to others. We have instances of 3 objects that were seen in the sky in a space of 3 months. And this concurrence seems to me to be something to judge by. Science has been built upon concurrence, so have been most of the fallacies and fanaticisms. I feel the positivism of a Leverrier, or instinctively take to the notion that all 3 of these observations relate to the same object. However, I don't formulate them and predict the next transit. Only to have appearance in quasiness is to be proportionately positive, but beyond a degree of attempted positivism, continuity will rise to pull you back. Here's another chance for me to become a fixed star, but as usual, a point in intermediatism, that the intermediatist is likely to be a flaccid compromiser. Our own attitude. Ours is a partly positive and partly negative state, or a state in which nothing is finally positive or finally negative. But if positivism attract you, go ahead and try. You will be in harmony with cosmic endeavor, but continuity will resist you. Note that they are spherical stone objects. And in the evening of this same day that something took a shot at Dhurmsala, and objects upon which there may be decipherable markings, lights, were seen in the air. I think myself of a number of things, beings, whatever they were, trying to get down, but resisted, like balloonists at a certain altitude, trying to get farther up, but resisted. Not in the least except to good positivists, or the homogeneous-minded. Does this speculation interfere with the concept of some other world that is in successful communication with certain esoteric ones upon this earth by a code of symbols that print in rock, like symbols of telephotographers in selenium. I think that sometimes in favorable circumstances, emissaries have come to this Earth secret meetings. Of course, it sounds secret meetings, emissaries, esoteric ones in Europe before the war broke out. And those who suggested that such phenomena could be. However, as to most of our data, I think of super things that have passed close to this Earth with no more interest in this Earth than have passengers upon a steamship in the bottom of the sea. Passengers may have a keen interest, but circumstances of schedules and commercial requirements forbid investigation of the bottom of the sea. Then, on the other hand, we may have data of super scientific attempts to investigate phenomena of this Earth from above, perhaps by beings and from so far away that they had never even heard that something somewhere asserts a legal right to this Earth. Altogether, we're intermediatists, but we can't be very good hypnotists. Still another source of the merging away of our data, that upon general principles of continuity. If super vessels or super vehicles have traversed this of Earth's atmosphere, there must be mergers between them and terrestrial phenomena. Observations upon them must merge away into observations upon clouds and balloons and meteors. To be very positive is to be a Napoleon Bonaparte, against whom the rest of civilization will sooner or later combine. Success, as it is called, though there is only success, failure in intermediateness will, in intermediateness, be yours proportionately as you are in adjustment with its own state, or some positivism mixed with compromise and retreat. For interesting data, see newspaper accounts fate of one Dowie of Chicago. Intermediatism, then, is recognition that our state is only a quasi-state. It is no bar to one who desires to be positive. It is recognition that he cannot be positive and remain in a state that is positive, negative. In the New York Times, there is no mention of ballooning in Canada or the United States in the summer of 1898. London Times, Sept. 29, 1885, a clipping from the Royal Gazette of Bermuda of Sept. 8, 1885, sent to the Times by General Lefroy that upon Arc. And 27, 1885, at about 8:30 a.m., there was observed a message by Miss D. Bassett, a strange object in the clouds, coming from the north. She called the attention of Mrs. L. Lowell to it, and they were both somewhat alarmed. Or that a great positivist isolated with no system to support him will be crucified, or will starve to death, or will be put in jail and beaten to death, that these are the pangs of translation to the positive absolute. So, though positive, negative myself, I feel the attraction of the positive pole of our intermediate state and attempt to correlate these three data, to see them homogeneously, to think that they relate to one object. In the aeronautic journals and in the London Times, there is no mention of escaped balloons in the summer or fall of 1898. However, they continued to object steadily for some time. It drew nearer. It was of triangular shape and seemed to be about the size of a pilot boat mainsail, with chains attached to the bottom of it. Nevertheless, General Lefroy, correlating with exclusionism, attempts to give a terrestrial interpretation to this occurrence. While crossing the land, it had appeared to descend, but as it went out to sea, it ascended and continued to ascend until it was lost to sight high in the clouds, or with such power to ascend. I don't think much myself of the notion that it was an escape balloon, partly deflated. He argues that the thing may have been a balloon that had escaped from France or England, or the only aerial thing of terrestrial origin that even to this date of about 35 years later has been thought to have crossed the Atlantic Ocean. He accounts for triangular form by deflation, a shapeless bag, barely able to float. My own acceptance is that great deflation does not accord with observations upon its power to ascend. In the Times Oct. 1885, Charles Harding of the RMS argues that if it had been a balloon from Europe, surely it would have been seen and reported by many vessels. Whether he was good a Briton as the general or not, he shows awareness of the United Stateser, that the thing may have been partly collapsed balloon that had escaped from the United States. General Lefroy wrote to Nature about it, Nature 3399, saying whatever his sensitivenesses may have been, that the columns of the Times were hardly suitable for such a discussion. Gosling of Bermuda, who also was an extraordinary person, he went to the trouble of interviewing Mrs. Bassett and Mrs. Lowell. If in the past there had been more persons like General Lefroy, we'd have better than the mere fragments of data that in most cases are too broken up very well to piece together. He took the trouble to write to a friend of his, Woach. Their description to him was somewhat different, an object from which nets was suspended deflated balloon with its network hanging from it, a super dragnet. That something was trawling overhead. The birds of Baton Rouge. Message. Or Gosling wrote that the item of chains or suggestion of a basket that had been attached had originated with Mr. Bassett, who had not seen the object. Monsieur, Gosling mentioned a balloon that had escaped from Paris in July. He tells of a balloon that fell in Chicago, September 17, or 3 weeks later than the Bermuda object. It's one incredibility against another, with disregards and convictions governed by whichever of the two dominants looms stronger in each reader's mind. That he can't think for himself any more than an I can is understood. My own correlatus, I think that we're fished for. It may be that we're highly esteemed by super epicures somewhere. It makes me more cheerful when I think that we may be of some use after all. I think that dragnets have often come down and have been mistaken for whirlwinds and waterspouts. Some accounts of seeming structure in whirlwinds and waterspouts are astonishing. And I have data that in this book I can't take up at all mysterious disappearances. I think we're fished for. In the London Times there is no mention of balloon ascents in Great Britain in the summer of 1885, but mention of 2 ascents in France. Both balloons had escaped, but this is a little expression on the side. It relates to trespassers, has nothing to do with the subject that I shall take up at some other time here, our use to some other mode of seeming that has a legal right to us. Nature 33-37, or Paris correspondent, writes that in relation to the balloon, which is said to have been seen over Bermuda in September, no ascent took place in France, which can account for it. Last of August, not September. Upon the 17th of July, it was reported by a sea captain still in the air, still inflated. But this balloon of Eloy's was a small exhibition balloon, made for short ascents from F.T. and Fairgrounds. In L.A., Renault, August 1885, it is said that these balloons had been sent up from F.T. of the 14th of July 4 days before the observation at Bermuda. The aeronauts were Gower and Eloy. Gower's balloon was found floating on the ocean, but Eloy's balloon was not found. In La Nature, 1885-131, it is said that it was a very small balloon incapable of remaining long in the air. As to contemporaneous ballooning in the United States, I find only one account, an ascent in Connecticut, July 29, 1885. We'd be materialists were it not quite as rational to express the material in terms of the immaterial as express the immaterial in terms of the material. Oneness of allness in quaseness. Upon leaving this balloon, the aeronauts had pulled the ripcord or turned it inside out. New York Times, 10/1885. To the intermediatist, the accusation of canthropomorphism is meaningless. There is nothing in anything that is unique or positively different. Of course, I mean only the spirit of all development. In reading discussions of papers by scientific societies, I have often noted how, when they approached forbidden or irreconcilable subjects, the discussions were thrown into confusion and ramification. It's as if scientific discussions have often been led astray as if purposefully as by something directive hovering over them. I will engage to write the formula of any novel in psychochemic terms, or draw its graph in psychomechanic terms, or write in romantic terms the circumstances and sequences of any chemic or electric or magnetic reaction, or express any historic event in algebraic terms. See Boole and Jevons for economic situations expressed algebraically. I think of the dominants as I think of persons, not meaning that they are real persons, not meaning that we are real persons, or the old dominant and its jealousy and its suppression of all things and thoughts that endangered its supremacy. For more than half an hour, still the dominants are suive very often, or are not absolute gods, and the way attention was led away from this subject is an interesting study in quasi-divine bamboozlement. Upon page 268, Charles J. P. Smith was right in attributing the appearance to some unseen object which was intercepting the sun's rays. But the old dominant, that was a jealous dominant, and the wrath of the old dominant against such an irreconcilability as large opaque objects in the sky casting down shadows upon clouds. Just so, in any embryo, cells that would tend to vary from the appearances of their era are compelled to correlate. In Nature, London 69's Teldon Smith writes that at Chisbury, Wiltshire, England, April 8, 1912, he saw something in the sky, unlike anything that I had ever seen before. Although I have studied the skies for many years, I have never seen anything like it. He saw two stationary dark patches upon clouds. The extraordinary part, they were stationary upon clouds that were rapidly moving. They were fan-shaped or triangular and varied in size, but kept the same position upon different clouds as outer cloud came along. Smith watched these dark patches, his impression as to the one that appeared first, that it was really a heavy shadow cast upon a thin veil of clouds by some unseen object away in the west, which was intercepting the sun's rays. Upon page 244 of this volume of Nature is a letter from another correspondent to the effect that similar shadows are cast by mountains upon clouds, and that no doubt Majersa. Cave, the meteorologist, writes that upon April 5 and 8 at Ditcham Park, Peterfield, he had observed a similar appearance while watching some Pilar balloons, but he describes something not in the least like a shadow on clouds, but a stationary cloud. The inference seems to be that the shadows at Chisbury may have been shadows of pilot balloons. Whatever it may have been, it's enough to make the devout make the sign of the crucible, or whatever the devotees of the old dominant do in the presence of a new correlate. Vast, black thing poised like a crow over the moon. It is our acceptance that these two shadows of Chisbury looked from the moon like vast things, black as crows, poised over the earth. Upon page 322, another correspondent writes upon shadows cast by mountains. Upon page 348, someone else carries on the divergence by discussing this third letter. Then someone takes up the third letter mathematically, and then there is a correction error in this mathematic demonstration. I think it looks very much like what I think it looks like. But the mystery here, that the dark patches at Chisbury could not have been cast by stationary pilot balloons that were to the west, or that were between clouds and the setting sun. They disappeared, and two dark triangular appearances that looked like notches were seen 3 minutes later upon the lower limb. It is our acceptance that two triangular luminosities and then two triangular patches like vast black things poised like crows over the moon, and like the triangularities at Chisbury, have been seen upon or over the moon. Scientific American 46492, two triangular luminous appearances reported by several observers in Lebanon. Con, evening of July 3, 1882, on the moon's upper limb. They approached each other, met, and instantly disappeared. The merger here is notches that have at times been seen upon the moon's limb, thought to be cross-sections of craters' monthly notices, AS 37432. If to the west of Chisbury a stationary object were high in the air, intercepting the sun's rays, the shadow of the stationary object would not have been stationary, but would have moved higher and higher with the setting of the sun. I have to think of something that is in accord with no other data whatsoever. A luminous body, not the Sunan, the sky, but because of some unknown principle or atmospheric condition, its light extended down only about to the clouds, that from it were suspended two triangular objects, like the object that was seen in Bermuda, that it was this light that fell short of the earth that these objects intercepted, that the objects were drawn up and lowered from something overhead, so that in its light their shadows changed size. If my grope seemed to have no grasp in it, and if a stationary balloon will, in half an hour, not cast a stationary shadow from the setting sun, we have to think two triangular objects that accurately maintained positions in a line between sun and clouds, and at the same time approached and receded from clouds. Brit, Asok, 1854, 400, account by two observers of a faint but distinctly triangular object, visible for 6 nights in the sky. It was observed from two stations that were not far apart, but the parallax was considerable. Whatever it was acceptably relatively close to this earth. I should say that relatively to phenomena of light, we are in confusion as great as some of the discords. Orthodoxy is in relatively to light. But these appearances of July 3, 1882, were vast upon the moon, seemed to be cutting off or obliterating nearly a quarter of its surface. Something else that may have looked like a vast black crow poised over this earth from the Moon Monthly Weather Review 41599, description of a shadow in the sky of some unseen body. April 8, 1913. Fort Worth, Texas, supposed to have been unseen cloudless patch of shade moved with the declining sun. Broadly and intermediatistically, our position is that light is not really and necessarily light any more than is anything else really, and necessarily anything but an interpretation of a mode of force, as I suppose we have to call it, as light. They have the theory of eclipses would not work out otherwise. So, arguing in conventional terms, the moon is black. At sea level, the Earth's atmosphere interprets sunlight as red or orange or yellow. High up on mountains, the sun is blue. Very high up on mountains, the zenith is black. Or it is orthodoxy to say that in interplanetary space, where there is no air, there is no light. So then the sun and comets are black, but this Earth's atmosphere, or rather dust particles in it, interpret radiations from these black objects as light. We look up at the moon. The jet black moon is so silvery white. I have about 50 notes indicating that the moon has atmosphere. Nevertheless, most astronomers hold out the moon has no atmosphere. Seems to me that that was interesting enough. In this editor we have a companion for Mr. Simmons and Dr. Gray. Crowds, gathering police called out for the special service of maintaining order and making the populace move on. The editor of the Lancet went to the square. He says that he saw nothing but a patch of light falling upon an arbor at the northeast corner of the enclosure. I think of something that for a week was suspended over London of an emanation that was not interpreted as light until it reached the ground. Lancet, June 1, 1867. That every night for a week a light had appeared in Woburn Square, London, upon the grass of a small park enclosed by railings. Rather astonishing explorers upon the moon stumbling and groping in intense darkness with telescopes powerful enough we could see them stumbling and groping in brilliant light. Or, just because of familiarity, it is not now obvious to us how the preposterousnesses of the old system must have seemed to the correlates of the system preceding it. A jet, black silvery moon. Altogether, then, it may be conceivable that there are phenomena of force that are interpretable as light as far down as the clouds, but not in denser strata of air, or just the opposite of familiar interpretations. I now have some notes upon an occurrence that suggests a force not interpreted by air as light, but interpreted or reflected by the ground as light. In May 1880, on a dark night, about 11:30 p.m., there suddenly appeared on each side of the ship an enormous luminous wheel whirling around, the spokes of which seemed to brush the ship along. 1883. Seeing so many meteorological phenomena in your excellent paper, Knowledge, I am tempted to ask for an explanation of the following, which I saw when on board the British India Company steamer Patna, while on a voyage up the Persian Gulf. The spokes would be 200 or 300 yards long and resembled the birch rods of the dame's schools. Each wheel contained about 16 spokes, and although the wheels must have been some 500 or 600 yards in diameter, the spokes could be distinctly seen all the way round. He suggests that the light came from a street lamp, does not say that he could trace it to any such origin himself, but recommends that the police investigate neighboring street lamps. I'd not say that such a commonplace as light from a street lamp would not attract and excite and deceive great crowds for a week, but I do accept that any cop who was called upon for extra work would have needed nobody's suggestion to settle that point the very first thing, or that something in the sky hung suspended over a London square for a week. 21 knowledge deck. The phosphorescent gleam seemed to glide along flat on the surface of the sea, no light being visible in the air above the water. The appearance of the spokes could be almost exactly represented by standing in a boat and flashing a bull's eye lantern horizontally along the surface of the water, round and round. I may mention that the phenomenon was also seen by Captain Arvin of the Patna and Manning Third Officer, Lee Four Brace, PSS. The wheels advanced along with the ship for about 20 minutes. LFB Jan 11, 1884, letter from Mixie. He then says, from the nom de plume he assumes, it might be inferred that your correspondent is in the habit of sailing close to the wind. He asks permission to suggest an explanation of his own. It is at before 11:30 p.m. There had been numerous accidents to the main brace, and that it had required splicing so often that almost any ray of light would have taken on a rotary motion. In knowledge, Jan. 25/1884, Miss Brace answers and signs himself G.T. Davo Robertson. I don't suppose Mixie D. That Lee for Brace, who sees so many meteorological phenomena in your excellent paper, should have signed himself the modern Ezekiel, for his vision of wheels is quite as wonderful as the prophets. The writer then takes up the measurements that were given and calculates a velocity at the circumference of a wheel of about 166 yards per second, apparently considering that especially incredible means any harm, but I do think it's rather unjust to say a man is drunk because he sees something out of the common. Robertson saw shining upward. It seems clear that this light did shine upward from origin below the surface of the sea. If there's one thing I pride myself upon, it's being able to say that never in my life have I indulged in anything stronger than water. From this curiosity of pride, he goes on to say that he had not intended to be exact, but to give his impressions of dimensions and velocity. He ends amiably. However, no offence taken, where I suppose none is meant. To this letter, Mr. Proctor adds a note apologizing for the publication of her mid-sea. D's letter, which had come about by a misunderstood instruction. Then Mr. Proctor wrote disagreeable letters himself about other persons. What else would you expect in a quasi-existence? The obvious explanation of this phenomenon is that under the surface of the sea in the Persian Gulf was a vast luminous wheel, that it was the light from its submerged spokes that Mitza. Also, it seems acceptable that a revolving wheel would, from a distance, look like a globe, that a revolving wheel, seen relatively close by, looks like a wheel in few aspects. Our acceptance is that, though disruption may intensify into incandescence, apart from disruption and its probable fairiness, things that enter this Earth's atmosphere have a cold light which would not, like light from molten matter, be instantly quenched by water. The mergers of ball lightning and meteorites are not resistances to us. Our data are of enormous bodies. So we shall interpret, and what does it matter? Our attitude throughout this book, that here are extraordinary data, that they never would be exhumed and never would be massed together And unless here are the data, our first atom is of something that was once seen to enter an ocean. It's from the Puritanic publication, Science, which has yielded us little material, or which, like most Puritans, does not go upon a spree very often. Whatever the thing could have been, my impression is of tremendousness, or of bulk many times that of all meteorites in all museums combined, also of relative slowness, or of long warning of approach. The story in Science 5242 is from an account sent to the Hydrographic Office at Washington from the branch office at San Francisco that at midnight Feb 24, 1885 lat. 37 N and long. All at once a large mass of fire appeared over the vessel, completely blinding the spectators. The fiery mass fell into the sea. Lying 170 E, or somewhere between Yokohama and Victoria, the captain of the bark Inuit was aroused by his mate, who had seen something unusual in the sky. This must have taken appreciable time. The captain went on deck and saw the sky turning fiery red. Details in the American Meteorological Journal, 6/4/43 Nov. We are told that it rose to a height of 50 feet and then advanced close to the ship, then moving away, remaining visible about 5 minutes. The supposition in nature is that it was ball lightning, but Flammarion thunder and lightning P. 68 says that it was enormous. But at first it is not so clear how vast luminous wheels, each the size of a village, ever got under the surface of the Persian Gulf. Also there may be some misunderstanding as to what they were doing there. A deep sea fish and its adaptation to a dense medium that, at least in some regions aloft, there is a medium dense, even to gelatinousness, a deep sea fish brought to the surface of the ocean. In a relatively attenuated medium, it disintegrates super constructions adapted to a dense medium in interplanetary spaces sometimes by stresses of various kinds. They are driven into this Earth's thin atmosphere. Later we shall have data to support just this, that things entering this Earth's atmosphere disintegrate and shine with a light that is not the light of incandescence, shine brilliantly. Even if cold, vast wheel like super constructions, they enter this Earth's atmosphere and threaten with disintegration, plunge for relief into an ocean or into a denser medium. Of course, the requirements now facing us are not only data of vast wheel, like super constructions that have relieved their distresses in the ocean, but data of enormous wheels that have been seen in the air, or entering the ocean, or rising from the ocean and continuing their voyages. Very largely, we shall concern ourselves with enormous fairy objects that have either plunged into the ocean or risen from the ocean. Its size may be judged by the volume of water cast up by it, said to have rushed toward a vessel with a noise that was deafening. The bark was struck flat aback, and a roaring white sea passed ahead. The master, an old experienced mariner, declared that the awfulness was beyond us of description. In Nature 3777 and Astronomy 1887-76, we are told that an object described as a large ball of fire was seen to rise from the sea near Cape Race. Lot 1344-36 E long. 3 luminous bodies were seen to issue from the sea at about half a mile from the vessel. He describes only 2 luminous bodies. 1887 British steamer Siberian, that the object had moved against the wind before retreating. That Captain Moore said that about the same place he had seen such appearances before. Report of the British Association 18661-30 upon June 1845, according to the Malta Times, from the brig Victoria, about 900 miles east of Adalia, Asia Minor 3640-56N. They were visible about 10 minutes. The story was never investigated, but other accounts that seem acceptably to be other observations upon this same sensational spectacle came in as if of their own accord and were published by Prof. Baden-Powell. One is a letter from a correspondent at Menti, Lebanon. Apparently they were 5 times the size of the moon. Each had appendages, or they were connected by parts that are described as sail-like or streamer-like, looking like large flags blown out by a gentle breeze. The important point here, it is not only suggestion of structure, but duration. The duration of meters is a few seconds. Duration of 15 seconds is remarkable, but I think there are records at up to half a minute. This object, if it were all one object, was visible at Lebanon about 1 hour. An interesting circumstance is that the appendages did not look like trains of meteors, which shine by their own light, but seemed to shine by light from the main bodies. About 900 miles west of the position of the Victoria is the town of Adalia, Asia Minor. At about the time of the observation reported by the captain of the Victoria, the Rev. F. Hollett, FRS, was in Adalia. He, too, saw this spectacle and sent an account to Prof. Baden-Powell. In his view, it was a body, and that appeared and then broke up. The 12th, 1836, was seen a luminous body, seemingly 2/3 the size of the moon. It seemed to rotate on an axis. He places duration at 20 minutes to half an hour. In the report of the British Association, 1860-82, the phenomenon was reported from Syria and Malta as 2 very large bodies nearly joined. Rept. Brit Assoc, 1867 entry, that Cherbourg, France, Jan. Central to it there seemed to be a dark cavity. For other accounts, all indefinite, but distortable into date of wheel-like objects in the sky. Seen the sky, 2267, London Times, Oct, 15/18/59, Nature, 21/2025, Monthly Weather Review, 1883-264, Astronomy, 1894-57, that upon the morning of Deck, 1893, an appearance in the sky was seen by many persons in Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. A luminous body passed overhead from west to east until at about 15 degrees in the eastern horizon. It appeared to stand still for 15 or 20 minutes. According to some descriptions, it was the size of a table. To some observers, it looked like an enormous wheel. The light was a brilliant white. Acceptably, it was not an optical illusion. The noise of its passage through the air was heard. Having been stationary or having seemed to stand still 15 or 20 minutes, it disappeared or exploded. No sound of explosion was heard. Vast wheel-like constructions. They're especially adapted to roll through a gelatinous medium from planet to planet. Seamen tell of what they see. Their reports are interred in scientific morgues. Sometimes because of miscalculations or because of stresses of various kinds, they enter this Earth's atmosphere. They're likely to explode. They have to submerge in the sea. They stay in the sea a while, revolving with relative leisureliness until relieved, and then emerge, sometimes close to vessels. The shafts revolved at a velocity about 60 miles an hour. Phosphorescent jellyfish correlate with the old dominant in one of the most heroic compositions of disregards in our experience. It was agreed in the discussion of captain. I should say that the general route of these constructions is along latitudes not far from the latitudes of the Persian Gulf. Journal of the Royal Meteorological Society, 2829 That, upon April 4, 1901, about 8:30, in the Persian Gulf, Captain Hoseason of the steamship Kilwa, according to a paper read before, the Society by Captain Hoseason, was sailing in a sea in which there was no phosphorescence, there being no phosphorus in the water. I suppose I'll have to repeat that. There being no phosphorescence in the water. Vast shafts of light, though, the captain uses the word, cripples, suddenly appeared. Shaft followed shaft upon the surface of the sea. But it was only a faint light, and in about 15 minutes died out, having appeared suddenly, having died out gradually. Hoseason's paper that the phenomenon was probably pulsations of long strings of jellyfish. Nature 21 and 4 letter reprint of a letter from Archie Harris, commander of the A-Ishan. Steamship Shah Jahan to the Calcutta Englishman Jan, 21/1880, that upon the 5th of June 1880, off the coast of Malabar, 10 p.m., watercom, sky cloudless, he had seen something that was so foreign to anything that he had ever seen before, that he had stopped his ship. However, he gives his opinion that it did no illuminating, but was, with the rest of the sea, illuminated by tremendous shafts of light. He saw what he describes as waves of brilliant light, with spaces between. Upon the water were floating patches of a substance that was not identified. Thinking in terms of the conventional explanation of all phosphorescence at sea, the captain at first suspected this substance. Whether it was a thick and oily discharge from the engine of a submerged construction or not, I think that I shall have to accept this substance as a concomitant because of another note. Haze wave succeeded wave, one of the most grand and brilliant yet solemn spectacles that one could think of, was here witnessed. Jaw. Roy. Met. Sock. 32/280 try. Extract from a letter from Mr. Douglas Carnegie, Blackheath, England. Roy. Met. Sock. 33/294 extract from a letter by Mr. Sisay Patterson, second officer of the P, and steamship Delta, a spectacle which the journal continues to call phosphorescent Malacca Strait, 2 a.m., March 14, 1907. Shafts which seemed to move round a centre like the spokes of a wheeland appeared to be about 300 yards long. The phenomenon lasted about half an hour, during which time the ship had travelled 6 or 7 miles. It stopped suddenly. Astronomy, 1891, 3/1200, a correspondent writes that in October 1891, in the China Sea, he had seen shafts or lances of light that had had the appearance of rays of a searchlight, and that had moved like such rays. Nature 20/29/1 report to the Admiralty by Captain. This time we have a definite datum upon origin somewhere below the surface. It is said that these waves of light passed under the Vulture. Evans, the hydrographer of the British Navy, that Commander J. Pringle of AMSS Vulture, had reported that. At lat 2026 N and long, 5311E in the Pergulf Mayfiti Gulfi 1879. He had noticed luminous waves or pulsations in the water moving at great speed. Date some time in 1906. This last voyage we witnessed a weird and most extraordinary electric display. In the Gulf of Oman, he saw a bank of apparently quiescent phosphorescence, but when within 20 yards of it, shafts of brilliant light came sweeping across the ship's bows at a prodigious speed, which might be put down as anything between 60 and 200 miles an hour. These light bars were about 20 feet apart and most regular. As to phosphorescence, I collected a bucketful of water and examined it under the microscope, but could not detect anything abnormal. That the shafts of light came up from something beneath the surface. They first struck us on our broadside, and I noticed that an intervening ship had no effect on the light beams. They started away from the lee side of the ship, just as if they had traveled right through it. The Gulf of Oman is at the entrance to the Persian Gulf. Sure. He judges the shafts to have been about 25 feet broad, and the space is about 100. Velocity about 84 miles an hour. Duration about 35 minutes. Time 9:40 p.m. Before and after this display, the ship had passed through patches of floating substance described as oily-looking fish spawn. But upon page 428 of this number of Nature, E.L. Moss says that in April 1875, when upon 8 by Mess, on looking toward the east, the appearance was that of a revolving wheel with a center on that bearing, and whose spokes were illuminated, and looking toward the west, a similar wheel appeared to be revolving, but in the opposite direction. Or finally, as to submergence, these waves of light extended from the surface well under the water. But it is Commander Pringle's opinion that the shaft constituted one wheel, and that doubling was an illusion. Bulldog, a few miles north of Vera Cruz, he had seen a series of swift lines of light. He had dipped up some of the water, finding in it animalcule, which would, however, not account for phenomena of geometric formation and high velocity. If he means Vera Cruz, Mexico, this is the only instance we have out of Oriental waters. Scientific American 106,005, that in the Nautical Meteorological Annual, published by the Danish Meteorological Institute, appears a report of a singular phenomenon that was seen by Captain Gabe of the Danish East Asiatic Coast steamship Bintang. At 3 a.m., June 10, 1909, while sailing through the Straits of Malacca, Captain Gabe saw a vast revolving wheel of light, flat upon the water, long arms issuing from a center around which the whole system appeared to rotate. So vast was the appearance that only half of it could be seen at a time, the center lying near the horizon. This display lasted about 15 minutes. Heretofore, we have not been clear upon the important point that forward motions of these wheels do not synchronize with the vessel's motions, and freaks of disregard, or rather commonplaces of disregard, might attempt to assimilate with lights of a vessel. Breyer of the Dutch steamer Valentine was in the South China Sea midnight hog. 12th, 1910, he saw a rotation of flashes. It looked like a horizontal wheel, turning rapidly. This time it is said that the appearance was above water. This time we are told that the vast wheel moved forward, decreasing in brilliancy and also in speed of rotation, disappearing when the center was right ahead of the vessel. My own interpretation would be that the source of light was submerging deeper and slowing down because meeting more and more resistance. The Danish Meteorological Institute reports another instance that when capped, though we're intermediatists, the call of attempted positivism in the aspect of completeness is irresistible. The phenomenon was observed by the captain, the first and second mates, and the first engineer, and upon all of them it made a somewhat uncomfortable impression. in general. If our expression be not immediately acceptable, we recommend to rival interpreters that they consider the localization with one exception of this phenomenon to the Indian Ocean and adjacent waters, or Persian Gulf on one side and China Sea on the other side. We have expressed that from few aspects would wheels of fire in the air look like wheels of fire, but if we can get it, we must have observation upon vast luminous wheels, not interpretable as optical illusions, but enormous, substantial things that have smashed down material resistances and have been seen to plunge the ocean. Athens, 1848, A33, that at the meeting of the British Association, 1848, so S, Earth Bauju Banner, communicated by Radshadeskov, airside, that upon the 27th of March, 1870, at lat. 5:47, N long, 27:52, U, the sailors of the Lady of the Lake saw a remarkable object, or cloud, in the sky. They reported to the captain. According to Captain, Harris said that he had recorded an account sent to him of a vessel toward which had walled 2 wheels of fire, which the men described as rolling millstones of fire. Oh, gone. When they came near, an awful crash took place. The topmasts were shivered to pieces. It is said that there was a strong sulphurous odour. 22 Journal of the Royal Meteorological Society, 1 Dun Feen, 57. Extract from the log of the bark Lady of the Lake by Captain. When it did finally disappear, that was none because it disintegrated like a cloud, but because it was lost to sight in the evening darkness. Captain Banner. It was a cloud of circular form with an included circle divided into 4 parts, the central dividing shaft beginning at the center of the circle and extending far outward, and then curving backward. Geometricity and complexity and stability of form, and the small likelihood of a cloud maintaining such diversity of features, to say nothing appearance of organic form. The thing traveled from a point at about 20 degrees above the horizon to a point about 80 degrees above. Then it settled down to the northeast, having appeared from the southeast, light grey in colour, or it was cloud colour. It was much lower than the other clouds. And this datum stands out that, whatever it may have been, it travelled against the wind, came up obliquely against the wind, and finally settled down right in the wind's eye. For half an hour this form was visible, but they had fallen with a great light. It is described a flame of fire about 2 feet in depth and 9 feet in length. Exceptly, this light was not the light of molten matter. In this chapter, we are very intermediatistic and unsatisfactory. The intermediatist accepts that which seems to correlate with something that he has accepted as a dominant. Banner draws the following diagram. Diagram 23. Textbooks tell us that the Dhurmsala meteorites were picked up soon, or within half an hour. Given a little time, the conventionalists may argue that these stones were hot when they fell, but that a great interior coldness had overcome the molten state of their surfaces. According to the Deputy Commissioner Amsala, these stones had been picked up immediately by passing coolies. These stones were so cold that they benumbed the fingers. Whatever agreement we have is an indication that somewhere aloft there is a medium denser than this Earth's atmosphere. To the intermediatist, there is but one answer to all questions, sometimes and sometimes not. Another form of this intermediatist solution of all problems is yes and no. Everything that is also isn't. A positivist attempts to formulate it, so does the intermediatist, but with less rigorousness he accepts, but also denies. He may seem to accept in one respect and deny in some other respect, but no real line can be drawn between any two aspects of anything. I suppose our stronghold is in that such is not popular belief or the rhythm of all phenomena dense at sea level upon this earthless, and less dense as one, a sense than denser and denser. We simply note cold light of falling bodies. For luminous rain, snow, and dust, see Hartwig, Aerial World, P3T9. As to luminous clouds, we have more nearly definite observations and opinions. They mark transition between the old dominant and the new dominant. The positivist correlates with a belief in the Dormsaler meteorites. We have support for our expression that things entering this Earth's atmosphere sometimes shine with a light that is not the light of incandescentia. So we account or offer an expression upon thunderstones or carved stones that have fallen luminously to this earth in streaks that have looked like strokes of lightning, but we accept also that some things that have entered this earth's atmosphere disintegrate with the intensity of flame and molten matter, but some things we accept enter this earth's atmosphere and collapse non-luminously, quite like deep sea fishes brought to the surface of the ocean. A good many bothersome questions arise our attitude. Here are the daytime luminous rains, sometimes fall nature, March 9, 1882, nature 25:437. This is light that is not the light of incandescence, but no one can say that these occasional or rare rains come from this earth's externality. We have already noted the transition in Prof. Schwedoff's theory of external origin of some hailstones and the implications that to a former generation seemed so preposterous droll was the word that there are in interplanetary regions volumes of water, whether they have fishes and frogs in them or not. Jess, in his observations upon luminous night clouds, notes the great height of them, and drolly or sensibly suggests that some of them may have come from regions external to this earth. I suppose he means only from other planets. So then that some clouds come from interplanetary oceans of the super Sargasso Sea, we still accept the super Sargasso Sea shine upon entering this Earth's atmosphere. In Himmel und Erde, February 1889, phenomenon of transition of 30 years ago hero. Now, our acceptance is that clouds come sometime from external regions, having had origin from super geographical oceans, that we shall not attempt to chart, just at presently suggesting to enterprising aviators sand. We note that we put it all up to them, and show no inclination to go Columbusing on our own account, that they take bathing suits, or rather deep sea diving suits along. But it's a very droll and sensible idea either way. In general, I am accounting for a great deal of this Earth's isolation, that it is relatively isolated by circumstances that are similar to the circumstances that make for relative isolation of the bottom of the ocean, except that there is a clumsiness of analogy now. I have a suspicion that, in their own depths, deep sea fishes are not luminous. If they are, Darwinism is mere Jesuitism in attempting to correlate them. Such advertising would so attract attention that all advantages would be more than offset. Darwinism is largely a doctrine of concealment. Here we have brazen proclamation, if accepted. Fishes in the mammoth cave need no light to see by. We might have an expression that deep sea fishes turn luminous upon entering a less dense medium, but models in the American Museum of Natural History specialized organs of luminosity upon these models. To call ourselves deep sea fishes has been convenient, but in a quasi-existence there is no convenience that will not sooner or later turn awkward. So if there be denser regions aloft, these regions should now be regarded as analogues of far submerged oceanic regions, and things coming to this earth would be like things rising to an attenuated medium and exploding, sunning sometimes incandescently, sometimes with cold light, sometimes non-luminously, like deep sea fishes brought to the surface together conditions of inhospitality. Acharius, in the Transactions of the Swedish Academy of Sciences, 1808-15, translated for the North American Review, 339th century, that M. Of course, we do remember that awfully convincing dodo, and some of our sophistications we trace to how at any rate disruption is regarded as a phenomenon of coming from a dense to a less dense medium. An account by M. Acharius, having heard of an extraordinary and probably hitherto unseen phenomenon, reported from near the town of Skänninge, Sweden, investigated that upon the 16th of May, 1808, at about 4 p.m., the sun suddenly turned dull brick red. When the place of a fall was examined, there was found a film which soon dried and vanished. At the same time there appeared upon the western horizon a great number of round bodies, dark brown, and seemingly the size of a hat crown. They passed overhead and disappeared in the eastern horizon. Tremendous procession. It lasted 2 hours. Occasionally one fell to the ground. Wherever their substance may have been in, it is described as gelatinous soapy and jellied. I place this datum here for several reasons. Often, when approaching the sun, these bodies seem to link together, or were then seen to be linked together in groups not exceeding 8, and under the sun. They were seen to have tails 3 or 4 fathoms long. Away from the sun the tails were invisible, or that all things here upon this earth that flock together are not necessarily sheep, Presbyterians, gangsters, or porpoises. It would have been a good climax to our expression upon hordes of small bodies that, in our acceptance, were not seeds, nor birds, nor ice crystals, that the tendency would have been to jump to the homogeneous conclusion that all our data in that expression related to this one kind of phenomena, whereas we conceive of infinite heterogeneity of the external, of crusaders and rabbles and emigrants and tourists and dragons and things like gelatinous hat crowns. We note here that in some of our acceptances upon intelligence, we should more clearly have pointed out that they were upon the intelligent as opposed to the instinctive. In the Monthly Weather Review, 33/4/9, there is an account of ball lightning that struck a tree. It made a dent such as a falling object would make. Some other time I shall collect instances of ball lightning to express that they are instances of objects that have fallen from the sky luminously, exploding terrifically. So bewildered is the old orthodoxy by these phenomena that many scientists have either denied ball lightning or have considered it very doubtful. I refer to Dara. The datum is important to us here as indication of observed disruption in this Earth atmosphere, dangers in entering this Earth's atmosphere. I think myself that thousands of objects have been seen to fall from aloft and have exploded luminously, and have been called ball lightning. As to what ball lightning is, we have not begun to make intelligent guesses. Monthly Weather Review 3417. In general, it seems to me that when we encounter the opposition, ball lightning, we should pay little attention, but confine ourselves to guesses that are at least intelligent, that stand phantom, like in our way. Sestier's list of 150 instances which he considered authentic, in accord with our disaccord, is an instance related in the Monthly Weather Review, March 1887, something that fell luminously from the sky, accompanied by something that's not so affected, or that was dark. That, according to Captain, one or both fell into the sea with a roar and the casting up of billows. Seedied Sweet of the Dutch barge PA, upon March 1977, 3739, dat feet 700, he encountered a severe storm. He saw two objects in the air above the ship. One was luminous and might be explained in several ways, but the other was dark. It is our acceptance that these things had entered this Earth's atmosphere, having first crashed through a field of ice. Immediately afterward, lumps of ice fell. One of the most astonishing of the phenomena of ball lightning is a phenomenon of many meteorites, violence of explosion out of all proportion to size and velocity. We accept that the icy meteorites of Dormsala could have fallen with no great velocity, but the sound from them was tremendous. The soft substance that fell at the Cape of Good Hope was carbonaceous, but was unburned or had fallen with velocity insufficient to ignite it. The tremendous report that it made was heard over an area more than 70 miles in diameter. That some hailstones have been formed in a dense medium and violently disintegrate in this Earth's relatively thin atmosphere. Nature 88.353 large hailstones noted at the University of Missouri. 1911, and they exploded with sounds like pistol shots. The writer says that he had noticed a similar phenomenon 18 years before at Lexington, Kentucky. Hailstones that seem to have been formed in a denser medium. When melted under water, they gave out bubbles larger than their central air spaces. Monthly Weather Review 33/445. Our acceptance is that many objects have fallen from the sky, but that many of them have disintegrated violently. See 298. The object that was said to have fallen at Marblehead, Mass. in 1858 is described in the AMA. This acceptance will coordinate with data still to come, but also we make it easy for ourselves in our expressions upon super constructions, if we're asked why, from thinkable wrecks of them, good as plates or parts recognizably of manufactured metal, have not fallen from the sky. CI 234, Hun 35, as a furnace product formed in smelting copper ores or iron ores containing copper, it is said to be fraudulent. According to Ehrenberg, the substance reported by Capt. However, as to composition, we have not this refuge, so it is our expression that there have been reported instances of the fall of manufactured metal from the sky. The meteorite of Rutherford, North Carolina, is of artificial material mass of pig iron. It is said to be fraudulent. Amma, Callum to have fallen upon his vessel near Java. Corford complete resemblance to the residue from combustion of a steel wire in a flask of oxygen. Zurcher Metius, P239. Nature Nov. 1878 publishes a notice, according to the Yuma Sentinel, meteorite that resembles steel had been found in the Mojave Desert. In Nature, Feb. 5th, 1894. We read that one of the meteorites brought to the United States by Peary from Greenland is of tempered steel. The opinion is that meteoric iron had fallen in water or snow, quickly cooling and hardening. This does not apply to composition. Nov. 5, 1898. Nature publishes a notice of a paper by Prof. Berworth of Vienna upon the close connection between meteoric iron and steel works steel at the meeting of Nov. 24, 1906, of the Essex Field Club was exhibited a piece of metal said to have fallen from the sky. Oct. 9, 1906, at Braintree. According to the Essex naturalist Fletcher of the British Museum, had declared this metal to be smelted iron, so that the mystery of its reported fall remained unexplained. 24. We shall have an outcry of silences. Anything has any quasi-identity you please. Some time ago conscription was assimilated with either autocracy or democracy with equal facility. Note the need for a dominant to correlate to. If a single instance of anything be disregarded by a system or own attitude, is that a single instance is a powerless thing. Of course, our own method agreement of many instances is not a real method. In continuity, all things must have resemblances with all other things. So I can conceive of no subject upon which there should be such poverty as a single instance. If anything one pleases can be whipped into line. Scarcely anybody said simply that we must have conscription, but that we must have conscription which correlates with democracy, which was taken as a base or something basically desirable. Of course, between autocracy and democracy, nothing but false demarcation can be drawn. It will be amazing or negligible to read all the instances now to come of things that have been seen in the sky, and to think that all have been disregarded. However, we shall try to be more nearly real than the Darwinites, who advance concealing coloration as Darwinism, and then drag in proclaiming luminosity too as Darwinism. I think the Darwinites had better come in with us as to the deep. See fishes and be sorry later, I suppose. My own opinion is that it is not possible or very easy to disregard them now they have been brought together, but that if prior to about this time we had attempted such an assemblage, the old dominant at our typewriter, as it is the letter, has gone back on us, and the S is temperamental. Most extraordinary and singular phenomenon. North Wales. 26, 1894, disc from which projected an orange-coloured body that looked like an elongated flatfish, reported by Admiral O'Mani, Nature 5524. Disc from which projected a hook-like form, India, about 1838. Diagram of it given, disc about size of the moon, but brighter than the moon, visible about 20 minutes, by G. 13, 1833, Amer, Jaw, C, 125, 3891. Something described as a bright white cloud at night, Nov. Through 1886, at Hamar, Norway, from it were emitted brilliant rays of light, drifted across the sky, retained throughout its original form. Nature Deck, Bettet, Improf, Baden-Powell's Catalogue, Rept, Brit. Asok, 1849, very brilliant hook-like form seen in the sky at Poland, Trumbull Co., Ohio, during the stream of meteors of 1833, visible more than an hour, large luminous body almost stationary for a time, shaped like a square table, Niagara Falls, Nov. 21, 1882, Knowledge 313, light that looked like a great flame far out at sea off Ryuk, Fayu, Deck 2, 1845, London Roy, Son, 1886, 158, thing with an oval nucleus and streamers with dark bands and lines very suggestive of structure. New Zealand, May 4, 1888, Nature, 42, 402, luminous object, size of full moon, visible an hour and a half. Chile, 5, 1883, Comptus, Rendus, 103, 6 and 82, bright object near sun, deck. Proc. 5, 627, something like a gigantic trumpet, suspended, vertical, oscillating gently, visible 5 or 6 minutes, length estimated at 425 feet, at Roxica, Mexico, July 6, 1874, Psi. Sup, 365, two lumines seemingly united, visible 5 or 6 minutes, June 3, 1898, La Nature, 1898, Wante 127, thin crossing moon, transit half a minute, sept. 26, 1870, London Times, sept. 30, 1870, object 4 or 5 times size of moon, moving slowly across sky, Nov. 1, 1885, near Adrianople, Astronomy, 1886, 309, large body, coloured red, moving slowly, visible 15 minutes, reported by Coggia, Marseille's Arg. 1, 1871, Chem. News 24, 193, details of this observation, and similar observation by Gilman, and other instances by de Fonville, Comptes Rendus, 73, 297, 755, thing that was large, and that was stationary twice in 7 minutes, Oxford, 19, 1847, listed by Low Rec. Drayton upon an object duration of which seemed to him extraordinary, duration 3, quarters of a minute, Jersey City, July 6, 1882. Psi 136, greyish object that looked to be about 3.5 feet long, rapidly approaching the earth at Saarbrück, April 1, 1826, sound like thunder, object expanding like a sheet ham. Jaw. Psi 126, 133, Jaw, Roy, Inst. 2488, report by an astronomer, Est. 4753, object like a comet, but with proper motion of 10 degrees an hour, visible 1 hour, reported by Piran and Glancy from the Cordoba Observatory, March 14th, 1916, Psi. Emma. 115, 493, something like a signal light, reported by Glacier Rock. 1844, bright as Jupiter, sending out quick flickering waves of light, Yearbook of Facts. 1845, 278. I think that with the object known as Eddie's Comet passes away the last of our susceptibility to the common and fallacy of personifying in. But so long as we remain in quasi-existence, we can cast out illusion only with some other illusion, though the other illusion may approximate higher to reality. So we personify no more, but we super-personify. It is one of the most deep-rooted of positivist illusions that people are persons. We've been guilty too often of spleens and spites and ridicules against astronomers as if they were persons or final unities, individuals, completenesses, or selves instead of indeterminate parts. We now take into full acceptance of expression that development is an autocracy of successive dominance, which are not final, but which approximate higher to individuality or self-ness than do the human tropisms that irresponsibly correlate to them. Eddy reported a celestial object from the observatory at Grahamstown, South Africa. It was in 1890. The new dominant was only heir presumptive then, or heir apparent but not obvious. The thing that Eddy reported might as well have been reported by a night watchman who had looked up through an unplaced sewer pipe. It did not correlate. The thing was not admitted to monthly notices. I think myself that if the editor had attempted to let it in the earthquake year, a mysterious fire in his publishing house. The dominants are jealous gods, in nature presumably a vassal of the new god, though of course also plausibly rendering homage to the old, is reported a comet, like body of Oct, 1890, observed at Grahamstown by Eddy. It may have looked comet-like, but it moved 100 degrees while visible, or 100 degrees in 3/4 of an hour. See Nature 4389-90. In Nature 44-519, Prof. Copland describes a similar appearance that he had seen Sept. 10/1891. Dreyer says Nature 44-541 that he had seen this object at the Armagh Observatory. He likens it to the object that was reported by Eddy. It was seen by Dr. Alexander Graham Bell, Sept. 11/1891 in Nova Scotia. But the old dominant was a jealous god, so there were different observations upon something that was seen in November 1883. These observations were Philistines in 1883. In the Amma, Met, Joel 1:1-10, a correspondent reports having seen an object like a comet with two tails, one up and one down, Nov of 10 or 12, 1883. If it had been a comet, it would have been seen widely, and the news would have been telegraphed over the world, says the editor. 1883, he and several other persons, as it were, had seen a majestic appearance like a comet. Visible 3 successive nights disappeared then. The editor says that he can offer no explanation. If accepted, this thing must have been close to the earth. Very likely this phenomenon should be, in our expression upon torpedo, shaped bodies that have been seen in the sky or data upon dirigibles or super zeppelins, but our attempted classifications are far from rigorous, are mere gropes. In the Scientific American 5040, a correspondent writes from Humacao, Puerto Rico, that Nov. Upon page 97 of this volume, the Scientific American, a correspondent writes that at Sulphur Springs, Ohio, he had seen a wonder in the sky. At about the same date, it was torpedo-shaped or something with a nucleus at each end of which was a tail. Again, the editor says that he can offer no explanation, that the object was not a comet. He associates it with the atmospheric effects general in 1883. Harrison was searching for Brorsen's comet when he saw an object that was moving so rapidly that it could not have been a comet. He called a friend to look, and his observation was confirmed at 2 o'clock. In the morning, this object was still visible, but it will be our expression that in England and Holland a similar object was seen in November 1882. In the Scientific American 4294 is published a letter from Henry Harrison of Jersey City, copied from the New York Tribune, that upon the evening of April 13, 1879, in the Scientific American Supplement 7/885, Mr. Harrison disclaims sensationalism, which he seems to think unworthy, and gives technical details. He says that the object was seen by Mr. J. Spencer Devo of Manhattanville, 25, a formation having the shape of a dirigible. It was reported from Huntington, West Virginia, Sci. Amma 115-241, luminous object that was seen July 1916 at about 11 p.m., observed through rather powerful field glasses. It looked to be about 2 degrees long and half a degree wide. It gradually dimmed, disappeared, reappeared, and then faded out of sight. Another person, as we say, it would be too inconvenient to hold to our intermediatist recognition. Another person who observed this phenomenon suggested to the writer of the account that the object was a dirigible, but the writer says that faint stars could be seen behind it. This would seem really to oppose our notion of a dirigible visitor to this earth, except for the inconclusiveness of all things in a mode of seeming that is not finaler we suggest that behind some parts of the object, thing, construction, faint stars were seen. We find a slight discussion here. Prof. 8mm Russell thinks that the phenomenon was a detached cloud of aurora borealis. Some of the accounts are not very detailed, but out of the bits of description, my own acceptance is that geographical routes are traversed by torpedo-shaped constructions have occasionally visited, or that have occasionally been driven into this Earth's atmosphere. Upon general principles, we think that explosives have not been purposely dropped, but that parts have been racked off and have fallen, exploding like the things called ball lightning. Many have been objects of stone or metal with inscriptions upon them, for all we know at present. Upon page 369 of this volume of the Scientific American, another correlator suggests that was a light from a blast furnace, disregarding that. If there be blast furnaces in or near Huntington, their reflections would be commonplaces there. We now have several observations upon cylindrical shaped bodies that have appeared in this Earth's atmosphere, cylindrical, but pointed at both ends, or torpedo, shaped. From data, the acceptance is that upon entering this Earth's atmosphere, these vessels have been racked, that had they not sailed away, disintegration would have occurred that before leaving this Earth. They have, whether in attempted communication or not, or in mere wantonness or not, dropped objects which did almost immediately violently disintegrate or explode. In all instances, estimates of dimensions are valueless, but ratios of dimensions are more acceptable. A thing said to have been 6 feet long may have been 600 feet long, but shape is not so subject to the illusions of distance. Nature, 44 or 50, that Leverrier had sent to the Academy 3 letters from witnesses of a long luminous body tapering at both ends that had been seen in the sky. In Thunder and Lightning, P. 87, Flammarion says that on Ogg. 20, 1880, during a rather violent storm, May 5, 1889, during a violent storm, an object be about 15 inches long and 5 inches wide, fell rather slowly at East Twickenham, England. It exploded. No substance from it was found. Alani Scientific 1864 F4 of that, Octen 1864 M. Triacle of the French Academy saw a very brilliant yellowish white body, apparently 35 to 40 centimeters long and about 25 centimeters wide. Torpedo-shaped, or a cylindrical body with slightly conical ends. Dropped something and disappeared in the clouds. A ball of light or a luminous object had been seen to fall from the sky or from a torpedo-shaped thing or construction in the sky. Try Cole's account, see Comptidus, Hundry 3, 8049, Monthly Weather Review, 1907, 3 Heaven, that July 2, 1907, in the town of Burlington, Vermont, a terrific explosion had been heard throughout the city. Whatever it may have been that was dropped, it fell vertically like a heavy object and left a luminous train. The scene of this occurrence may have been far from the observer. No sound was heard. For M, no one had seen this thing that had exploded fall from a larger body that was in the sky, but if we accept that at the same time there was a larger body in the sky, my own acceptance is that a dirigible in the sky, or a construction that showed every sign of disrupting, had barely time to drop whatever it did drop and to speed away to safety above. The following story is told in the review by Bishop Johns. My chod, I was standing on the corner of Church and College Streets, just in front of the Howard Bank and facing east, engaged in conversation with Governor Woodbury and Mr. A.A. Bill, when, without the slightest indication or warning, were startled by what sounded like a most unusual and terrific explosion, evidently very nearby. Raising my eyes and looking eastward along College Street, I observed a torpedo-shaped body some 300 feet away, stationary in appearance and suspended in the air, about 50 feet above the tops of the buildings. Although stationary when first noticed, this object soon began to move rather slowly and disappeared over Dolan Brothers' store southward. In size it was about 6 feet long by 8 inches in diameter, the shell, or covering, having a dark appearance, with here and there tongues of fire issuing from spots on the surface, resembling red, hot, unburnished copper. My own acceptance is that upon Nov, 1882, a vast dirigible crossed England, but by the indefiniteness of all things quasi-real, some observations upon it can be correlated with anything one pleases. E.W. As it moved, the covering seemed for rupturing in places, and through these the intensely red flames issued. Bishop Macott attempts to correlate it with meteorological observations. Because of the nearby view, this is perhaps the most remarkable of the new correlates. But the correlate now coming is extraordinary because of the great number of recorded observations upon it. 1882 at night, there was an aurora without features of special interest. In the midst of the aurora, a great circular disk of greenish light appeared and moved smoothly across the sky. But the circularity was evidently the effect of foreshortening. Maunder, invited by the editors of the observatory to write some reminiscences for the 500th number of their magazine, gives one that he says stands out at Observatory 39-240. It is upon something that he terms strange celestial visitor. Maunder was at the Royal Observatory, Greenwich, Nov. The thing passed above the moon and was by other observers described as cigar, shaped like a torpedo, a spindle, a shuttle. The idea of foreshortening is not minor, Maunder says this. He says, had the incident occurred a third of a century later, beyond doubt everyone would have selected the same. Similar it would have been just like a Zeppelin. The duration was about 2 minutes. Color said to have been the same as that of the auroral glow in the north. Nevertheless, Maunder says that this thing had no relation to auroral phenomena. It appeared to be a definite body. Motion too fast for a cloud, but nothing could be more unlike the rush of a meteor. In the Philosophical Magazine 5/15/3/18, J. Rand Capron, in a lengthy paper, alludes throughout this phenomenon as an auroral beam, but he lists many observations upon a shape, torpedo, and one observation upon a dark nucleus in a host of most confusing observations estimates of height be 40 and 200 miles observations in Holland and Belgium. We are told that according to K. Capron spectroscopic observations, the phenomenon was nothing but a beam of auroral light. In the Observatory 6-192 is Maunder's contemporaneous account. He gives apparent approximate length and breadth at 27 degrees and 3 degrees and a half. He gives other observations seeming to indicate structure remarkable dark marking down the center. In Nature 27/84, Capron says that because of the moonlight he had been able to do little with the spectroscope, color white, but aurora rosy, nature 27A7. Bright stars seen through it, but not at the zenith, where it looked opaque. Groneman that it was a cloud of meteoric matter, nature 28105. See nature 2715, 338, 365, 3884, 1234. Very little doubt it was an electric phenomenon. Proctor, knowledge 249. In the London Times, Nov. This is the only assertion of transparency, nature 2787, too slow for a meteor, but too fast for a cloud, nature 2786. Surface at a mottled appearance, as nature 27A7. Very definite in form, like a torpedo, nature 27100. Probably a meteoric object, Dr. Groneman, nature 27296. Technical demonstration by Doffer, 2018-82. The editor says that he had received a great number of letters upon this phenomenon. He publishes two. One correspondent describes it as well-defined and shaped like a fish. They looked like electric lights disappearing, reappearing dimly, then shining as bright as ever. We have seen them 3 or 4 at a time afterward on 4 or 5 occasions. London Times, Oct. Fife, 1877 tree. From time to time, the west coast of Wales seems to have been the scene of mysterious lights. And now we have a statement from Towan that within the last few weeks, lights of various colors have been seen moving over the estuary of the Decini River and out to sea. Extraordinary and alarming. The other correspondent writes of it as most magnificent luminous mass, shaped somewhat like a torpedo, 26 notes and quarries, 5 3 6, about 8 lights that were seen in Wales over an area of about 8 miles, all keeping their own ground, whether moving together perpendicularly, horizontally, or over a zigzag course. They were visible more than an hour moving northward. It is said that 8 or 10 years before similar lights or objects had been seen in the sky at Vents. London Times, September 1948 tree, that Inverness, Scotland, 2 large, bright lights that looked like stars had been seen in the sky, sometimes stationary, but occasionally moving at high velocity. L'Année Scientifique, 1888, 66, observed near Steam. They are generally in a northerly direction, but sometimes they hug the shore and move at high velocity for miles toward Aberdyfi and suddenly disappear. L'Année Scientifique, 1877, 4 tree. Lights that appeared in the sky above Vents, France, March 23, 1877, described as balls of fire of dazzling brightness, appeared from a cloud about a degree in diameter, moved relatively slowly. Petersburg, July 30, 1880, in the evening, a large spherical light and 2 smaller ones, moving along a ravine, visible 3 minutes, disappearing without noise. Nature 35, 1733, that at Yorlosept, 1886, was seen a luminous object the size of the full moon. There was an investigation. Before a commission headed by Admiral Collinson, testimony was taken. It floated slowly northward, followed by smaller ones close to it, the false lights of Durham. Every now and then in the English newspapers, in the middle of the 19th century, there is something about lights that were seen against the sky, but as if not far above land, oftenest upon the coast of Durham. They were mistaken for beacons by sailors. Wreck after wreck occurred. The fishermen were accused of displaying false lights and profiting by wreckage. The fishermen answered that mostly only old vessels, worthless except for insurance, were so wrecked. In 1866, London Times. Jan 9, 1866, popular excitement became intense. One witness described the light that had deceived him as considerably elevated above ground. No conclusion was reached. The lights were called the mysterious lights. But whatever the false lights of Durham may have been, they were unaffected by the investigation. Remarkable, it seems, is scarcely strong enough. One reads of remarkable as applied to a duration of 3 seconds. These meteors had another peculiarity. They left no train. In 1867, the Tyne Pilotage Board took the matter up. Opinion of the mayor of Tyne, a mysterious affair. In the report of the British Association, 1877-52, there is a description of a group of meteors that travelled with remarkable slowness. They were in sight about 3 minutes. Chant of Toronto, there appeared upon the night of Feb. 9th, 1913, a spectacle that was seen in Canada, the United States, and at sea and in Bermuda. A luminous body was seen. To it there was a long tail. The body grew rapidly larger. They are described as seemingly huddled together like a flock of wild geese and moving with the same velocity and grace of regularity. Jur. Roy, Astro. Sock. Canada, November 19th December. That, according to many observations collected by Prof. Onward they moved at the same deliberate pace in 2s or 3s or 4s. They disappeared. Observers differ as to whether the body was single or was composed of 3 or 4 parts with a tail to each part. The group or complex structure moved with a peculiar, majestic deliberation. It disappeared in the distance, and another group emerged from its place of origin. Charles J. Norcock of 8 HLMS Carolina, that upon the 24th of February, 1893, at 10 p.m. between Shanghai and Japan. The officer of the watch had reported some unusual lights. They were between the ship and a mountain. The mountain was about 6,000 feet high. The lights seemed to be globular. They moved sometimes massed, but sometimes strung out in a regular line. They bore northward until lost to sight. Duration 2 hours. The next night the lights were seen again. They were, for a time, eclipsed by a small island. They bore north at about the same speed and in about the same direction as speed and direction of the Caroline. But they were lights that cast a reflection. There was a glare upon the horizon under them. A third group or a third structure followed. Some observers compared the spectacle to a fleet of airships, others to battleships attended by cruisers and destroyers. According to one writer, there were probably 30 or 32 bodies, and the peculiar thing about them was their moving in 4s and 3 trees, abreast of one another. And so perfect was the lining up that you would have thought it was an aerial fleet maneuvering after rigid drilling. Major 25, 1893, a letter from Captain. A telescope brought out, but few details that they were reddish and seemed to emit a faint smoke. This time the duration was 7.5 hours, then capped. Norcock says that in the same general locality and at about the same time capped Castle of H&MS. Leander had seen lights. He had altered his course and had made toward them. The lights had fled from him. At least they had moved higher in the sky. Monthly Weather Review, March 1904, 115th report from the observations of 3 members of his crew by Lute. Frank H. Schofield, USN of the USS Supply, Feb. 24th, 1904. 3 luminous objects of different sizes, the largest having an apparent area of about 6 suns. When first sighted, they were not very high. They were below clouds of an estimated height of about 1 mile. They fled, or they evaded, or they turned. They went up into the clouds below, which they had at first been sighted. Their unison of movement, but they were of different sizes and of different susceptibilities to all forces of this earth and of the air. Monthly Weather Review, view August 18/9, 3D50D8, 2 letters from CN. It seemed to float within 100 feet of the earth, but soon rose high, or midway between horizon and zenith. The wind was quite strong from the east, but the light held a course almost due north. Its speed varied. Krotzenberg, Crow Agency, Montana, in the summer of 1896, when this writer was a railroad postal clerker, one who was experienced in train phenomena while his train was going northward from Trenton Moo. He and another clerk saw, in the darkness of a heavy rain, a light that appeared to be round and of a dull rose color, and seemed to be about a foot in diameter. Sometimes it seemed to outrun the train considerably. At other times it seemed to fall behind. The mail clerks watched until the town of Linville, Iowa, was reached. Behind the depot of this town, the light disappeared and was not seen again. All this time there had been rain, but very little lightning, but Mr. Krotzenberg offers the explanation that it was ball lightning. The editor of the review disagrees. He thinks that the light may have been a reflection from the rain or fog, or from leaves of trees glistening with rain, or the train's light-not lights. In the December number of the review is a letter from Edward M. It includes and assimilates diverse data, but it excludes that which will destroy it, that, acceptably, the telegraph wires were alongside the track beyond, as well as leading to Linville. Mr. So unreal that I hesitated to speak of it, fearing that it was some freak of the imagination, 27 vast and black. The thing that was poised like a crow over the moon, round and smooth. Cannonballs. Bogs that the light was a reflection, perhaps from the Glarewan light, this time from the locomotive's fire box. Upon wet telegraph wires an appearance that might not be striated by the wires, but consolidated into one rotundity that it had seemed to oscillate with the undulations of the wires, and had seemed to change horizontal distance with the varying angles of reflection, and had seemed to advance or fall behind when the train had rounded curves, all of which is typical of the best of quasi reasoning. Things that have fallen from the sky to this earth, our slippery brains. Things like cannonballs have fallen in storms upon this earth. Krotzenberg thinks of ball lightning, which, though a sore bewilderment to most speculation, is usually supposed to be a correlate with the old system of thought. But his awareness of something else is expressed in other parts of his letters, when he says that he has something to tell that is so strange that I should never have mentioned it, even to my friends, had it not been corroborated. A red powder fell in Switzerland, winter of 867 pop. Sigh, like cannonballs are things that in storms have fallen to this earth. Showers of blood, showers of blood, showers of blood. Whatever it may have been, something like red brick dust or a red substance in a dried state, fell at Piedmont, Italy, Oct. 27, 1814, Electric Magazine, 68-437. Rev. 10-1 from 12, that something far from this earth had Bledzuper dragon that had rammed a comet, or that there are oceans of blood somewhere in the sky substance that dries and falls in a powder wafts for ages in powdered form, that there is a vast area that will someday be known to aviators as the desert of blood. In this rain were flakes of a hyacinthine tint. It is said that this substance was organic. We are told that it was pyrene. But distinctly enough, we are told of one red rain that it was of corpuscular composition snow. Rather, we attempt little of super topography at present, but ocean of blood or desert of blood of both Italy is nearest to ITER to them. I suspect that there were corpuscles in the substance that fell in Switzerland, but all that could be published in 1867 was that in this substance there was a high proportion of variously shaped organic matter. At Gießen, Germany, in 1821, according to the report of the British Association, 5 or 2, fell a rain of a peach, red colour. March 12, 1876, near the Crystal Palace, London Year Book of Facts, 1876-89, Nature 13-4-14, as to the red snow of polar and mountainous regions. We have no opposition, because that snow has never been seen to fall from the sky. It is a growth of microorganisms, or of a protococcus that spreads over snow that is on the ground. We now have support to the acceptance that they had been formed in a medium far denser than air of this earth at sea level. In the Popular Science News 2238 is an account of ice that had been formed under great pressure in the laboratory of the University of Virginia. When released and brought into contact with ordinary air, this ice exploded. And again, the flesh-like substance that fell in Kentucky, its flake-like formation. Here is a phenomenon that is familiar to us. It suggests flattening under pressure. But the extraordinary inference is pressure not equal on all sides. In the Annual Record of Science, 1873-50, it is said that in 1873, after a heavy thunderstorm in Louisiana, a tremendous number of fish scales were found for a distance of 40 miles along the banks of the Mississippi River, bushels of them picked up in single places, large scales that were said to be of the garfish, a fish that weighs from 5 to 50 pounds. It seems impossible to accept this identification. One thinks of a substance that had been pressed into flakes or scales. This time nothing is said of sand from the Sahara. It is said of the red matter that fell in London, March 20, 1876, that it was composed of corpuscles of Corsa, that they looked like vegetable cells. And notey, that 9 days before had fallen the red substance, flesh, whatever it may have been, of Bath County, Kentucky. I think that a super egotist, vast, but not so vast as it had supposed, had refused to move to one side for a comet. We summarize our general super geographical expressions: gelatinous regions, sulfurous regions, frigid and tropical regions. A region that has been source of life relatively to these are regions wherein there is density so great that things from them entering this earth thin atmosphere explode. We have had a datum of explosive hailstones, and round hailstones with wide thin margins of ice irregularly around them still. Such hailstones seem to me more like things that had been stationary, had been held in a field of thin ice. I have been impressed with the frequent occurrence of sulphurousness with things that come from the sky. A fall of jagged pieces of ice, Orkney, July 24, 1818, trans. Roy. Suck. Eden, Nyman, 87. They had a strong sulphurous odor. And the coquio, the substance that looked like coquethat, fell at Moultrie, France, April 24, 1887, with it fell a sulphurous substance. the enormous round things that rose from the ocean near the Victoria. In the Illustrated London News 34/546 are drawings of hailstones so margined as if they had been held in a sheet of ice. Some day we shall have an expression which will be, to our advanced primitiveness, a great joy at that devils have visited this earth, foreign devils human, like beings with pointed beards, good singers, one shoe ill-fitting but with sulphurous exhalations. At any rate, the sun had set. In Nature 58/224, a correspondent writes that upon July 1, 1898, at Sedberg, he had seen in the sky a red objector, in his own wording, something that looked like the red part of a rainbow, about 10 degrees long. But the sky was dark at the time. Whether we still accept that they were constructions that had come from a denser atmosphere and in danger of disruption, had plunged into the ocean for relief, then rising and continuing on their way to Jupiter or Uranus, it was reported that they spread a stench of sulfur. At any rate, this datum of proximity is against the conventional explanation that these things did not rise from the ocean, but rose far above of the horizon with illusion of nearness. And the things that were seen in the sky July 1898, I have another note. I have looked that matter up again. Super geographical lakes with fishes in them. Meteorites that plunge through these lakes on their way to this earth. A heavy rain was falling. Throughout this book, the datum that we are most impressed with successive falls, or that if upon one small area things fall from the sky and then later fall again upon the same small area, they are not products of a whirlwind, which though sometimes actually stationary, discharges tangentially so the frogs that fell at Wigan. The positiveness in our make-up must have expression in at least one record of a meteorite that has brought down a lot of fishes with it. Nature 3/5/12 on that, near the bank of a river in Peru, Feb. 4, 1871, a meteorite fell. Later more frogs fell. As to our data of gelatinous substance said to have fallen to this earth with meteorites, it is our expression that meteorites tearing through the shaky protoplasmic seas of Genesis Trini, against which we warn aviators, or they may find themselves suffocating in a reservoir of life, or stuck like currents in a blank. Mangat meteorites detach gelatinous or protoplasmic lumps that fall with them. Now, the element of positiveness in our composition yearns for the appearance of completeness. Le Gould, an Australian scientist, was travelling in Queensland. He saw a tree that had been broken off close to the ground. Where the tree had been broken was a great bruise. Nearby was an object that resembled a 10-inch shot. A good many pages back there was an instance of overshadowing, I think. The little carved stone that fell at Tarbes is my own choice as the most impressive of our new correlates. It was coated with ice, remember. On the spot, it is reported, several dead fishes were found of different species. The attempt to correlate is that the fishes are supposed to have been lifted out of the river and dashed against the stones. Whether this be imaginable or not depends upon each one's own hypnosis. Nature 469, that the fishes had fallen among the fragments of the meteorite. Popular Science Review 4/26, that one day, Mr. Suppose we should sift and discard half the data in this book, suppose only that one datum should survive. To call attention to the stone of Tarbes would, in my opinion, be doing well enough, for whatever the spirit of this book is trying to do. Nevertheless, it seems to me that a datum that preceded it was slightingly treated. The disk of quartz, said to have fallen from the sky after a meteoric explosion, said to have fallen at the plantation Blijgendel, Dutch Guiana, sent to the Museum of Leyden by M. Van Sijperstein, adjutant to the governor of Dutch Guiana Notes and Queries 2, 892. And the fragments that fall from super, geographic ice, fields, flat, pieces of ice with icicles on them. I think that we did not emphasize enough that if these structures were not icicles, but crystalline protuberances, such crystalline formations indicate long suspension quite as notably as would icicles. In the Popular Science News 2434, it is said that in 1869, near Tiflis, fell large hailstones with long protuberances. The most remarkable point in connection with the hailstones is the fact that, judging from our present knowledge, a very long time must have been occupied in their formation. But according to the Geological Magazine, the 727, this fall occurred May 27, 1869. A thing the size of the Brooklyn Bridge, we have had the later accounts first very largely for an impression of the correlating effect that time brings about by addition, disregard, and distortion. It's alive in outer space, something the size of Central Park kills, it drips. We think of the ice fields above this earth, which do not themselves fall to this earth, but from which water does fall. Popular Science News 35 unforfrei, that according to Prof. For instance, the dead calm in a single day. If I had found that the excitement did die out rather soon, I'd incline to accept that nothing extraordinary had occurred. I found that the excitement had continued for weeks. I recognize this as a well-adapted thing to say, to divert attention from a discorrelate. All phenomena are explained in the terms of the dominant of their era. This is why we give up trying really to explain and content ourselves with expressing. Devils that might print marks in snow are correlates to the third dominant back from this era. The writer in the Geological Magazine says that of all theories that he had ever heard of, not one could give him light as to this occurrence. These growing crystalline forms must have been suspended a long time. Again and again this phenomenon 14 days later at about the same place. More of these hailstones fell, rivers of blood that vein albuminous seas, or an egg-like composition in the incubation of which this earth is a local center of development, that there are super arteries of blood in Genesistron, that sunsets are consciousness of them, that they flush the skies with northern lights, sometimes super embryonic reservoirs from which life forms emanate, or that our whole solar system is a living thing, that showers of blood upon this earth are its internal hemorrhages, or vast living things in the sky, as there are vast living things in the oceans, or a special thing, and a special time, and a special place. So it was an adjustment by 19th century correlates, or human tropisms, to say that the marks in the snow were clawed. Hoof, like marks, are not only horsey, but devilish. It had to be said in the 19th century that those prints showed claw marks. In neither representation is there the faintest suggestion of a claw mark. There never has been a Prof. We shall see that this was stated by Prof. Owen, one of the greatest biologists of his day, except that Darwin didn't think so. But I shall give reference to two representations of them that can be seen in the New York Public Library. Hunting parties were organized, but the baying, terrified hounds do not appear in contemporaneous accounts. The story of the kangaroo looks like adaptation to needs for an animal that could spring far, because marks were found in the snow on roofs of houses. 1855, in the snow by the inhabitants of many towns and regions between towns. This great area must, of course, be disregarded by Prof. Owen and the other correlators. Owen, who has explained he has correlated. Another adaptation in the later accounts is that of leading this discorrelate to the old dominant into the familiar scenery of a fairy story, and discredit it by assimilation to the conventionally fictitious, or the idea of the baying and terrified hounds and forests like enchanted forests, which no one dared to enter. The tracks were in all kinds of unaccountable places, in gardens and closed by high walls and up on the tops of houses, as well as in the open fields. There was in Limestone scarcely one unmarked garden. We've had heroic disregards, but I think that here disregard was titanic. Mr. Musgrave alluded to the subject in his sermon and suggested the possibility of the footprints being those of a kangaroo. But this could scarcely have been the case, as they were found on both sides of the Est. But so astonishing is the extent of snow that was marked that after a while another kangaroo was added, but the marks were in single lines. My own acceptance is that not less than 1,000 one-legged kangaroos, each shod with a very small horseshoe, could have marked that snow of Devonshire. London Times, Feb 16th, 1855. Considerable sensation has been caused in the towns of Topsham, Limestone, Exmouth, Teignmouth, and Dawlish in Devonshire, in consequence of the discovery of a vast number of foot tracks of a most strange and mysterious description. The story is of an incredible multiplicity of marks discovered in the morning of Feb. As might have been expected, the party returned as they went. Various speculations have been made as to the cause of the footprints. In addition to the circumstances mentioned in the Times a little while ago, it may be stated that at Dawlish a number of persons sallied out armed with guns and other weapons for the purpose, if possible, of discovering and destroying the animal which was supposed to have been so busy in multiplying its footprints. And because they occurred in single lines, the marks are said to have been more like those of a biped than of a quadruped, as if a biped would place one foot precisely ahead of another unless it hopped, but then we have to think of 1,000 or of thousands. It is said that the marks were generally 8 inches in advance of each other. The impression of a foot closely resembles that of a donkey's shoe, and measured from 1.5 inches in some instances to 2.5 inches across, or the impressions were cones in incomplete or crescentic basins. The diameters equal diameters as a very young colt's hoofs, too small to be compared with marks of donkey's hoofs. On Sunday last the Rev. At present it remains a mystery, and many superstitious people in the above named towns are actually afraid to go outside their doors after night. The Est is a body of water 2 miles wide. London Times, March 6, 1855. The interest in this matter has scarcely yet subsided, many inquiries still being made into the origin of the footprints, which caused so much consternation upon the morning of the 8th ult. Some have asserted that they are those of a kangaroo, while others affirm that they are the impressions of claws of large birds to shore by stress of weather. In the issue of Feb, on more than one occasion, reports have been circulated that an animal from a menagerie had been caught, but the matter at present is as much involved in mystery as ever it was. In the Illustrated London News, the occurrence is given a great deal of space. The writer, who had spent a winter in Canada and was familiar with tracks in snow, says that he had never seen a more clearly defined track. Also, he brings out a point that was so persistently disregarded by Prof. Owen and the other correlators that no known animal walks in a line of single footsteps, not even man, with these wider inclusions. This writer concludes with us that the marks were not footprints. 24/1855, a sketch is given of the prints. I call them cones in incomplete basins. Except that they're a little longish, they look like prints of hoofs of horses, rather of colts. But they're in a single line. It is said that the marks from which the sketch was made were inches apart, and that this spacing was regularable in every parish. Also, other towns, besides those named in the Times, are mentioned. It may be that his following observation hits upon the crux of the whole occurrence, that whatever it may have been that had made the marks, it had removed rather than pressed. The snow, according to his observations, the snow looked as if branded with a hot iron. Illustrated London News, March 3, 1855, 2:40 by Prof. Always this homogeneous seeing. Badger, swan, track. I should have listed the other towns as well as those mentioned in the Times. A letter from Mr. Musgrave is published. He, too, sends a sketch of the prints. It, too, shows a single line. Owen, to whom a friend had sent drawings of the prints, writes that there were claw marks. He says that the track was made by Hall Badger. 6 other witnesses sent letters to this number of the News. One mention, but not published, is a notion of a strayed swan. There are 4 prints, of which the third is a little out of line. There is no sign of a claw mark. The prints look like prints of longish hoofs of a very young colt, but they are not so definitely as in the sketch of February 24th, as if drawn after disturbance by wind or after thawing had set in. After that, many other witnesses wrote to the News. The correspondence was so great that, in the issue of March 10th, only a selection could be given. Measurements at places 1.5 miles apart gave the same spacing exactly 8.5 inches apart. We now have a little study in the psychology and genesis of an attempted correlation. Missa, it has been observed also that its walk is not like that of the generality of quadrupeds, but that it is more the bounding or leaping of a horse when scared or pursued. There's a jumping rat solution and a hopping toad inspiration, and then someone came out strong with an idea of hare that had galloped with pairs of feet held close together, so as to make impressions in a single line. London Times, March 14th, 1843. Among the high mountains of that elevated district where Glenley and Glenorchy are contiguous, there have been met with several times during this and also the former winter upon the snow the tracks of an animal seen namely unknown at present in Scotland. It's been interesting to me to go over various long established periodicals and note controversies between attempting positivists and then intermediatistic issues. The print, in every respect, is an exact resemblance to that of a foal of considerable size, with this small difference, perhaps, that the sole seems a little longer, or not so round. But as no one has had the good fortune as yet have obtained a glimpse of this creature, nothing more can be said of its shape or dimensions, only it has been remarked from the depth to which the feet sank in the snow that it must be a beast of considerable size. Musgrave says, I found a very apt opportunity to mention the name kangaroo in allusion to the report then current. He says that he had no faith in the kangaroo story himself, but was glad that a kangaroo was in the wind, because it opposed a dangerous, degrading and false impression that it was the devil. Mine was a word in season and did good, whether it's Jesuitical or not, and no matter what it is or isn't, that is our own acceptance, that though we've often been carried away from this attitude controversially, that it is our acceptance as to every correlate of the past that has been considered in this book relatively to the dominant of its era. Another correspondent writes that though the prints in all cases resembled hoof marks, there were indistinct traces of claws that Anne Otter had made the marks. It's been interesting to me to go over various long established periodicals and note controversies between attempting positivists and then intermediatistic issues in the US. Bold, bad intruders of theories, ruffians with dishonorable intention, the alarms of for science, her attempts to preserve that which is dearer than life itself, submission then, fidelity, like Mrs. Micawber's. The intense blackness and general ominous appearance of the storm spread terror throughout the city. M. Mavo 39345. However, this merger between possible eclipses by unknown dark bodies and commonplace terrestrial phenomena is formidable. As to darknesses that have fallen upon vast areas, conventionality is smoke from forest fires.